Welcome, everybody. Project Constitution. We are watching the Kash Patel hearing. Supposed to start here any minute. So we got the live feed going, and as soon as it starts, then you'll be able to see it. So just hang tight and hang in there, and it'll start very shortly.
They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. Eat the cat, eat the cat. They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. Eat the cat, eat the cat.
Donald Trump came to the Detroit Economic Club and stood there in front of the Ford Motor executives and said, if you close these factories as you're planning to do in Detroit and build them in Mexico, I'm going to put a 35% tariff on those cars when you send them back, and nobody's going to buy them. It was an amazing thing to see.
We have a sufficient number of people,
Republican or Democrat,
to start, and since
had ever said anything like that.
This is going to take a while, I think we should get started. Today, do we have enough people here to hold it over? Okay, yeah. We have two items on our agenda: Kash Patel's nomination to serve as Director of FBI, and S331, the Fentanyl Act. Because the HALT Fentanyl Act is listed on the agenda for the first time, it'll be held over until our next meeting. Last week, committee Democrats exercised their right under the committee rules to hold Patel's nomination for 7 days. Obviously, we had to honor that hold from last week. So today is the day that we vote on this nominee. Now, we all know that Mr. Patel, like other nominees, undergo rigorous vetting. He's no exception. Before his hearing, he produced more than 1,000 pages of records, disclosed over 1,000 interviews. He underwent an FBI background investigation, produced a financial disclosure, and worked with ethics officials to identify and resolve potential conflicts of interest. At his hearing, he answered questions for more than 5 hours and provided 147 pages of responses to written questions. So we've examined every detail of his life, and he's been subjected to relentless attacks on his character during this whole period of time. Now, what we've learned from this committee process is what we knew from his resume. Mr. Patel has spent his whole career fighting for righteous causes. He's been a public defender representing the accused against the power of the state. He's been a congressional staffer investigating the partisan weaponization of our legal system. And he served in key national security roles, protecting Americans from foreign enemies. He's received support from former FBI agents, former federal and state prosecutors, and organizations representing more than 680,000 law enforcement officers. But Mr. Patel's resume, his accomplishments, and his supports aren't why he's the best person for this job. Mr. Patel should be considered our next FBI director because the FBI has been infected by political bias and weaponized against the American people. Mr. Patel knows it. Mr. Patel exposed it, and Mr. Patel has targeted for it. And I've got plenty of examples to show what's wrong with the FBI. Mr. Patel was instrumental in exposing Crossfire Hurricane. He showed during that investigation that the Democratic National Committee funded false allegations against President Trump, that the Department of Justice and the Federal Bureau of Investigation hid information from the FISA court to wiretap a presidential campaign and that an FBI lawyer lied in the process. As reward for his efforts to uncover this truth, he was attacked by the media, and the Department of Justice secretly subpoenaed his records. Now, I and my staff know a thing or two about this kind of retaliation because my staff received similar treatment during our investigation. Sadly, as I've said at Mr. Patel's hearing, Crossfire Hurricane is but one example of recent FBI misconduct. The FBI targeted traditional Catholic families and concerns of parents for political reasons. The FBI coordinated with social media platforms to suppress the Hunter Biden laptop scandal. The FBI conducted an unprecedented raid on President Trump's home in an act of partisan lawfare. In just the last few days, we've heard unconfirmed reports that someone at the FBI may have illegally leaked information about upcoming ICE raids, putting the lives of ICE agents at risk. If true, the betrayal can't be overstated. The FBI has fallen into really old habits and is long overdue for massive reform. Mr. Patel is the man to do it, and that's why he's being attacked so viciously right now. Before we even had a hearing, committee members called Mr. Patel by these adjectives: dishonest, untrustworthy, lacking in character, a wolf at the door, a conspiracy theorist, a staunch political loyalist, and lastly, a nightmare. Since his nomination was announced, committee Democrats have sent at least 11 letters to 11 different agencies and parties demanding records and urging investigation into Mr. Patel. Each letter breathlessly accuses Mr. Patel of something new, often citing quote unquote highly credible anonymous sources that don't fit the facts. Some accused him of not following hostage rescue protocol. Others suggested he is secretly directing FBI personnel decisions. And some accused him of promoting conspiracy theories. The purpose of this campaign is quite obvious. Throw everything at the wall and hope something sticks. I'm not falling for it, and I don't believe the American people will likewise. These attacks are unfair, this harassment unwarranted. They show that Mr. Patel won't receive fair consideration from the opposition, and they're directed at a nominee who served his country during both Democratic and Republican administrations. I expect we'll hear more unfair attacks and character smears today, but I'd like to point out a few egregious ones that we've already heard. One of my colleagues suggested that Mr. Patel called the police officers that protected the Capitol on January 6 cowards in uniform, end of quote, or quote unquote. Now, this is completely false. Anyone can listen to this same interview that he gave to hear what he actually said. He said, senior Pentagon leadership who failed to mobilize the National Guard were quote unquote cowards in uniform. His comments had absolutely nothing to do with the people in blue. Mr. Patel has also been accused of mismanaging hostage rescue missions, particularly one in Africa. But numerous national security officials, including General Tata, who was directly involved, have said it is, quote unquote, irresponsible to say Mr. Patel jeopardized the mission and that Mr. Patel, quote, played a large role in the success of the mission, unquote. Mr. Patel has also been accused of having an enemies list. Mr. Patel does not call his book appendix an enemies list, and he said that it is not about political revenge. He believes, as I believe, that those who have abused their positions in government should be called out for breaking the public trust. It's very clear that my Democrat colleagues made their minds up about Mr. Patel long before he was given an opportunity to be heard. And now my colleagues attack Mr. Patel and demand that he come back before this committee to answer for reforms and personnel changes that the Trump administration has begun at the FBI. Of course, it's outrageous, as we all know, to suggest that a nominee should come before the Senate to answer questions for an agency's action that occurred before he gets to be head of that agency. But more importantly, FBI reforms, and yes, even firings, are needed. The Trump administration is cleaning house at the FBI because the FBI is and has been for years infected with political bias and whistleblower retaliation, and I've got a lot to say about that in just a minute. It's long past overdue for the whistleblowers who's been affected by FBI misconduct to be given a voice. So now I'm going to take some time sharing statements from whistleblowers who were retaliated against some of the FBI officials that Trump has recently fired. Now, I'd like to have the White House and my Republican colleagues take note of this, because I think some of these people should be reinstated because of how justly they've been treated. And like you've heard me so many times say, whistleblowers are treated like a skunk at a picnic. And I hope my Democrat colleagues will learn a lesson about how the FBI has previously treated whistleblowers, both under Republican administrations and Democrat administrations, so that we don't have this happening again. One whistleblower said, quote, "People like these have harmed the noble mission of the Bureau. They've created turmoil, and their personal agenda has spread throughout the Bureau over the last decade. In service of the country, we should insist on removing them from the FBI, not tomorrow, but right now," end of quote. Remember, he said the last decade. That covers presidents of both parties. A second whistleblower said, quote, "Michael Nordwall had oversight and approval authority over Arctic frost, which required a critical assessment of alleged basis for opening an investigation of this magnitude and political significance. The failure to raise an objection, much less critically assess Thibault's motives, alone should be grounds for dismissal," end of quote. And for my Democrat colleagues, you've heard me talk about Thibault for the last 2 years. One of the few people that I ever know that Ray fired for doing things wrong. And I had to point that out to him. Now pay attention to this one. A third FBI whistleblower said, quote, on January 6, 2021, I took leave and went to see the president speak on the ellipse. Later, my wife and I were among a crowd southwest of the Capitol. Even though we were involved in no violence, never set foot on the steps of the leading to the Capitol building, and never entered it, I self-reported my presence to the FBI after seeing violence in the news reports. The FBI did nothing at first, but more than a year later, suspended my security clearance. Under supervision of Jeff Veltri and Dina Perkins, investigators questioned my co-workers about whether I ever vocalized support for President Trump or objections to COVID-19 vaccine. I was forced to take early retirement to pay bills and have essentially been sidelined from employment opportunities due to the FBI abuse of the clearance system to target me for my political beliefs, end of quote. Now you're going to hear these names, Jeff Veltri and Dina Perkins, crop up here quite often. So I don't know who they are, but they're obviously not very good people to have in the FBI when they take retaliation as they have. A fourth FBI whistleblower and a registered Democrat said, quote, as a security division employee, I witnessed abuses committed against multiple employees by FBI senior leaders, particularly by Jeff Veltri and Dina Perkins. I also saw a security division retaliated against 5 of its own employees for protesting these unlawful practices. Because I spoke out against these abuses, Perkins and Timothy Dunnan suspended my security clearance, costing me my job and continuing employment, totaling approximately $700,000 in lost wages and retirement benefits, end of quote. A fifth whistleblower said, quote, although some of my FBI leaders who abused the clearance process, like Dina Perkins and Jeff Veltri, have already left, they weren't alone. Timothy Dunham approved Perkins' wrongdoings and engaged in his own. While most security division employees are fantastic, some FBI leaders still remain within the security and integrity and investigation section who will continue this abuse of the process. From FBI whistleblower Marcus Allen, quote, Jeff Veltri and Dina Perkins caused the suspension of my security clearance because I questioned whether the FBI director was truthful to Congress and whether the FBI was obeying the laws and constitutions in the January 6, 2021 investigation. Their actions left me without pay for 2 years, while other FBI officials prevented me from having other income. Although the FBI ultimately reinstated my clearance and settled my lawsuit, my career at the FBI was over, and the financial and emotional damage to me and my family will never be completely restored. Why should you have to hire a lawyer and sue just because you use your constitutional right of free speech? Another FBI whistleblower said, quote, after
We're live.
was assigned to review Marcus Allen's security clearance case, I noticed the file was missing relatively. I'm going to start this quote over. After I was assigned to review Marcus Allen's security clearance case, I noticed the file was missing relative communication of Jeff Feltry, who ordered the opening of the case. Dina Perkins and FBI attorney Tasha Gibbs. Allen was entitled to those communications, which were evidence that his clearance suspension was retaliatory. Shortly after I completed the vast majority of work on the communication recommending Allen's reinstatement, the Allen case was reassigned to another adjudicator, and I was transferred to a different unit, apparently in reprisal for reporting the wrongdoing in the Allen suspension. I soon resigned from the FBI to avoid further retaliation. I believe that Veltri, Perkins, and Gibbs were responsible for retaliating against Allen, and that Giuliani, Arzini, Perkins, and Gibbs were likely responsible for retaliation against me, end of quote. From FBI whistleblower Garrett O'Boyle, quote, I faced retaliation from junior, mid, and senior level, unquote, leaders in the FBI. More than 29 months later, I'm still indefinitely suspended without pay and benefits. Other whistleblowers have since confirmed that the FBI intentionally stranded me in the middle of a move and withheld our possessions to maximize the pain of my suspension. A new era of accountability and true whistleblower protection to the FBI is long overdue. FBI officials like Sean Clark, Sean Fitzgerald, Jeff Berkebile, Dina Perkins, Jeff Veltri, Jennifer Moore, Michael Snyders, Timothy Dunham, and other leadership up to Christopher Wray are responsible for what happened to me and my family, ensuring they no longer work at the FBI isn't retribution, it's responsible leadership. From FBI whistleblower Steve Friend, Jacqueline McGuire was promoted to upper echelons of the FBI after sending federal agents to arrest nonviolent Catholic pro-life protester Mark Houck at gunpoint. As someone who lost my career by blowing the whistle on these kinds of abuses and needlessly risky tactics for cooperative subjects, I was offended by her being rewarded rather than held accountable. Her dismissal is a small step towards ending the FBI's weaponization and should come sooner, end of quote. From FBI whistleblower Mike Zoomer, quote, after witnessing federal prosecutors favor a sexual predator district attorney who used the power of his office to sexually abuse vulnerable women, I reported their wrongdoing to the presiding federal judge. Although the allegations weren't classified, the FBI suspended and later revoked my security clearance. The U.S. attorney responsible for the misconduct was named by President Biden to lead the Department of Justice criminal investigation, and the FBI special agent in charge responsible for the FBI's retaliation against me was promoted to be the third highest FBI official. He soon retired after he harassed a young female subordinate. Meanwhile, I went through an 8-year process to be reinstated, only to have the Biden DOJ affirm the FBI's revocation of my security clearance in December 2024, finalizing my removal. See how removing a security clearance is a tool to retaliate and ruin people professionally. And lastly, I know you're tired of listening to this, so that's why I said, and lastly, from another FBI whistleblower, quote, I've watched the FBI become an institution, not quote unquote, of the people, but of a select few who know the quote unquote system and process and use it to their advantage. Those people need to leave. As a whistleblower, I stand ready to help return the FBI to its earlier days of glory and return America's trust in what was an incredible institution, end of quote. Now, how can anybody listen to these statements from the FBI to know that there's a culture that just is not totally in tune with what law enforcement agency ought to do and conclude that everything is okay? These law enforcement agencies are out of control, drunk on power, and blinded by political infection. It's time to force them to recognize they answer to Congress and we the people. And those who retaliated against whistleblowers should be fired full stop by colleagues who think otherwise of protecting these whistleblowers. And I hope this message gets to President Trump. My Democratic colleagues hounded Patel to say he'd stand up to Trump. Well, these brave whistleblowers stood up to the last administration and they suffered retaliation. So why aren't my Democrat colleagues running to defend them and demanding the wrongdoers be held accountable? This administration must hold the bad actors accountable, fire them if necessary, give whistleblowers their security clearance back. President Trump, I hope you hear that. Put them in a position they were in before they had their retaliation. President Trump, I hope you hear that. If you can hire people, you can reinstate people, President Trump. That's part of what this committee ought to be focused on. Solutions to the rampant weaponization and whistleblower retaliation. These are two issues that Kash Patel is perfectly suited to fix because he's lived those issues. Senator Durbin.
Thank you, Chairman Grassley. After reviewing Kash Patel's record and meeting with him, questioning him at this hearing, I'm even more convinced that he has neither the experience, the judgment, nor the temperament to lead the FBI. A little history. 50 years ago, Frank Church led an effort to investigate the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They came up with a sweeping reform and conclusion. Congress passed a law limiting the FBI director to a single term of 10 years, subjecting the appointment to the advice and consent of the Senate. These actions were taken specifically to ensure that FBI director remains apolitical and is shielded from outside influence, and that no FBI director amasses the kind of power that J. Edgar Hoover, the founder of the FBI, exercised when he had wiretaps on Martin Luther King Jr. and other civil rights leaders and branded them as communist. For the last half century, this law has served its purpose. At Mr. Patel's hearing, one of my Republican colleagues suggested that consideration of an FBI director is a, quote, shirts and skins game, quote unquote. That is clearly incorrect if you look at the record. I've served on this committee for more than 20 years during the consideration of 4 FBI director nominations. Bob Mueller twice, Comey, and Wray before this one. Each of these directors was a Republican, and I voted for all of them. Some game of shirts and skins. What it boils down to is this agency should be above politics. What we have just heard from the chairman is an invitation for a political free-for-all if Kash Patel is chosen as the head of this FBI. I will not be surprised when my Republican colleagues again claim that the Democrats have weaponized the FBI, as we've already heard, despite the fact for the last 50 years, every single Senate-confirmed head of the FBI has been a Republican. Even former Chris Wray, former director, has been a frequent target of outrage. My Republican colleagues conveniently never mention that Director Wray is a lifelong Republican, nominated to the position by Republican President Donald Trump, and confirmed to the position, get this, with the unanimous support of Senate Republicans. Unanimous. As a reminder, President Biden kept Director Wray, a Republican appointed by President Trump, in that position. But because he did not do his bidding, President Trump forced Wray out and nominated Mr. Patel, an inexperienced loyalist to the Trump administration. It turns out that Mr. Patel is already seeking retribution on behalf of President Trump, despite his status as a private citizen. As I revealed earlier this week, multiple whistleblowers have disclosed to my staff highly credible information indicating that Mr. Patel, a civilian, is personally directing the ongoing purge of senior law enforcement officials at the FBI. The ramifications of these terminations are dangerous and they go beyond Mr. Patel's fitness for office. This purge has greatly weakened the FBI's ability to protect the country from national security threats and made America less safe. This week, I invited the head of the organization that represents FBI agents to come to my office and talk to me about the morale at the FBI. Two women came and visited with me. Both of them had served as FBI agents for long periods of time, one for 22 years and another for 17 years, and they both were proud to tell me their fathers were FBI agents before them. They said to me they have never seen this kind of thing happen in the transition of one president to another when it comes to the FBI. There is only one person nominally and officially who is political at the FBI, the director. All the others are professional and career employees. One political person. But now there's been a request from this administration, for example, to produce the names of all of the agents and staff at the FBI who worked on the January 6th insurrection mob that assaulted the Capitol. Think about that for a second. 38,000 employees at the FBI. How many do you think worked on that case? 5,000 names. 5,000 names they want to disclose. It's understandable that these FBI agents are worried. They realize that the people who were engaged in that mob action on the Capitol, many of them were dangerous people, despite the full pardon given to them by Donald Trump. Let me tell you about one of them, just to give you an example. And if you question whether the FBI agents should be reluctant to have their identities and the identities of their families made public, his name was Guy Reffitt. He was the first defendant to stand trial on charges related to January 6th. Sentenced to 87 months in prison for bringing a firearm into the Capitol that day. Reffitt's 19-year-old son, Jackson, turned him into law enforcement after the attack. Jackson also indicated that Reffitt had threatened to shoot him personally and his sister Peyton if they reported him to authorities. After receiving a pardon from President Trump, Reffitt attended Kash Patel's Senate Judiciary Committee meeting in this room. He posted on social media the following, and I quote, "Present and in support of Kash Patel, as the leftist commies continue to spew lies, misinformation and disinformation, my man, clean house Kash." We are inviting a political disaster if we put Kash Patel into this job. Can you imagine having worked for the FBI all your life, taking an oath that you're ready to give your life in defense of this country, be involved in all of the assignments that you were assigned to, and then comes a new president, Donald Trump, and wants to see the names of whether you were one of the people who was involved in the January 6th investigation, the largest criminal investigation in the history of the United States. I think this is outrageous. If we have respect for these agents, show it. To invite this political warfare that's been described already this morning is to the detriment of the men and women who are risking their lives for us in this agency. We have a list here of 6 executive assistant directors who have been purged already from the FBI. I asked the FBI agents, has this ever happened before with a new president? No, never happened before. These are top FBI officials who oversaw the FBI's work combating international and domestic terrorism, cybercrime, drug trafficking, and violent crime. In the FBI's long history, this has never happened before. Keep in mind, one political appointee, the director, all others career. The leaders who've been forced out are all career FBI officials who've worked their way up in the ranks and have decades of experience. And that's only the beginning. Acting Director, Deputy Attorney General Emil Bove, apparently acting at Mr. Patel's direction, has asked for a list of FBI personnel who worked on any matters relating to the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. He is the transition leader, or was a transition leader for the Trump administration. Meanwhile, 1,600, including one of the individuals I just described to you, January 6 defendants who were given blanket pardon by Trump are on the loose. Think about that. A man who brought the gun into the Capitol, 87-month sentence, blanket pardon by Donald Trump, and now they wanted full disclosure of the names of the FBI agents who were involved in this case. It is outrageous that these sworn FBI agents, who were simply doing the jobs assigned to them, now fear for their livelihoods and their safety and the safety of their families. It is unacceptable for a nominee with no role in government to personally direct the unjustified, potentially illegal firing of dedicated, nonpartisan FBI officials. And if these allegations are true, Mr. Patel has come dangerously close to perjury before this Senate Judiciary Committee. Why do I say that? During the hearing, when he was asked about possible terminations of the FBI by Senator Booker, Mr. Patel said, I don't know what's going on right now over there. Mr. Patel seems to be unable to wait for Senate confirmation to carry out his plan of retribution on behalf of President Trump. This is a private citizen, Patel, with no role in government, allegedly directing baseless firings of career public servants, and then misleading this committee about his actions. Given the serious nature of these allegations, I've asked the DOJ Inspector General to investigate. I urge my Republican colleagues to take these allegations seriously. I know you want to be loyal to your president. I know you want to vote for all of his nominations. I know none of you want to call from Elon Musk reminding you what he might do to somebody who votes the wrong way. But this really gets down to the heart of the future of an agency that is critical to the security of this nation. This is not the only time Mr. Patel misled the committee under oath. At his hearing, he implausibly told me he could not recall the name Stu Peters, an anti-Semitic Holocaust denier. Patel under oath said, I can't recall his name. This is simply not credible, considering that Mr. Patel appeared on Mr. Peters' podcast 8 times. Couldn't pick the name out of it. Stu Peters? No, I don't think I know that man. 8 times. And Mr. Peters has since revealed that he and Mr. Patel directly communicate via their personal cell phones, quote, constantly, close quote. Stu Peters? Say the name again. Don't recognize it. Mr. Patel also claimed he didn't have anything to do with the recording of the so-called January 6th prison choir, those who were convicted of assaulting people and trespassing on the United States Capitol on January 6th. Here's what he told Steve Bannon, and I quote, we got this idea to record the January 6th prisoners who recite the national anthem every night from the DC prison. Then we took that to the studio, so we mastered and digitized it. And he said he had nothing to do with it under oath. Mr. Patel has demonstrated a lack of sound judgment by associating with extremist figures like Mr. Peters, who have well-documented histories of racist, anti-Semitic, and conspiratorial statements. But now, somehow, my colleagues on the other side are silent. Mr. Patel clearly lacks the temperament to lead the FBI. Don't take it from me. Read his own words. I wonder if any of my Republican colleagues accepted my invitation to read this book, and I did read it. Government Gangsters. In this book, Mr. Patel published an enemies list of 60 people whom he calls, quote, members of the deep state, whatever the hell that is, and accuses of being, quote, corrupt actors of the first order. This list includes many distinguished public servants, both Democrats and Republicans alike. What they share in common is the misfortune of having crossed paths with Patel. There's one of them I'm going to highlight, and many of the people on the panel know him, Bob Mueller. Bob Mueller is an extraordinary man. Yes, he's a Republican. Yes, I voted for him to be director of the FBI. He finished his college career and enlisted in the Marine Corps to serve in Vietnam. He received a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star for his combat duty. Came back, worked as a prosecutor, worked his way up in the Department of Justice, and became the director of the FBI. He took over just days after 9/11. I worked with him for years. I respect him completely, and we all should respect him, if for nothing else, his service to our country in combat in Vietnam. And now he is on the enemies list of Kash Patel. Mr. Patel gives no quarters when he disagrees with someone. He's called Democrats, quote, vindictive, evil, and vicious. And then there is his social media posts repeatedly attacking Republican senators for not voting right and not following MAGA orthodoxy. During the previous administration, my Republican colleagues were outraged by Biden judicial nominees' social media posts. And they deemed poetry written by a nominee in college 30 years ago as disqualifying him to serve on the bench because it showed, quote, Marxist ideology. 30 years ago, wrote a poem. Be careful. Where is the outrage now for Mr. Patel, who has launched disgusting attacks on everyone from Elon Musk to LeBron James? Mr. Patel has also displayed a startling disdain for the agency he's been nominated to lead. He wants to, quote, shut down the FBI, Hoover Building on day one, reopen it the next day as a museum of the deep state, quote, unquote. He falsely claimed that the FBI was planning January 6th for a year before it happened. His conspiratorial theories just keep bounding out in his book and otherwise. He can't stop. And he's been clear about what he wants to do with the FBI's vast surveillance and investigative powers, saying, quote, we're going to come after the people in the media. Mr. Patel has been open about his plans to dismantle the FBI and seek retribution. And he's already begun that mission as a private citizen, targeting senior FBI officials. Consider for a moment, if he is successful in this nomination, his first meeting of the head of the as head of the FBI with the men and women who are sworn to uphold the law and serve at his direction. Think about the morale in that room in light of what's going on. Mr. Patel's directives have already thrown the Bureau into chaos. Senior executives who collectively have hundreds of years of experience have been forced out. Thousands of line agents across the country are living in fear of losing their jobs simply because they did the job they were assigned to do. How does any of this make America safer? The American people need an FBI director focused on keeping the public safe from terrorism, drug trafficking, and violent crime, not petty personal grievances. I yield.
Thank you, Senator Durbin. Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Let me start by disagreeing with the notion that what took place with respect to the cases against President Trump was weaponization. I know that's the Republican theory of the case, but the other reason why the FBI and the Department of Justice would investigate Trump for crimes is because Trump was doing crimes. And there was adequate predication to pursue investigation of those crimes. And indeed, in every case that I'm aware of in which those cases were allowed to go to judgment, the president was convicted. So we can't allow the weaponization narrative to just remove the notion that the guy was investigated and prosecuted for crimes because he did the crimes. Once you start with the notion that Trump is not a criminal but a victim, you then have to invent the conspiracy that victimized him. And once you've propagated that conspiracy, you then have to find who the conspirators are. So then you have to go after FBI agents and DOJ folks in order to prop up that theory. The way that ended in Soviet Russia was with show trials of the individuals who were allegedly in the conspiracy. The way that ends in Trump's America is with agents and prosecutors forced out in mass purges that may well, as the ranking member Durbin has pointed out, been driven by Kash Patel as a private citizen. So starting with that point, there are three reasons why Kash Patel is extremely dangerous. One is all of his wild MAGA behavior. This is a guy whose judgment is beyond questionable. It's appallingly bad. We have a lot of quarrel about whether his enemies list is an enemies list and whether we're smearing the guy by saying that his enemies list is an enemies list. Here's what he said about it. He showed his enemies list and said, who are? He retweeted a video showing him chainsawing the heads off of people on his enemies list. If you're chainsawing the heads off of people, are they not your enemies? So the invention that this is not an enemies list requires people to go into just fantasy land. And these are his own statements. These aren't our accusations. These are Patel's own words. Going after people in the media, impeaching judges who disagree with us, shutting down the FBI Hoover building, on and on and on. This guy is a flagrant extremist with appallingly bad judgment. Second point, we don't know enough about this mischief yet. There are real open questions. We've never in this committee had a person come for a serious senior law enforcement position who had testified in a grand jury criminal matter, and we don't know what he testified about. He's entitled to tell us. That's basic grand jury rule 6E law. But this side of the committee is completely covering that up. We have absolutely no statement from Patel about what his grand jury testimony was. And he's at liberty to give that to us. He just won't. And Republicans won't tell him to. So he gets away with it. He pled the fifth. You don't get to plead the fifth without a real and genuine concern that you can be prosecuted for a crime. What crime? We're entitled to know. We've never had somebody come through this committee for a high senior law enforcement position who had pled the fifth. He's got the right to do that, of course. We've got the right to know. And by the way, when he exercises the right to do that in a civil proceeding, that entitles the jury to draw the adverse inference that what he is covering up in the civil proceeding with his Fifth Amendment assertion is against his interests. A judge will instruct a jury about that adverse interest, and we're not supposed to draw an adverse interest in this committee when we're not told about his Fifth Amendment assertion. There's all this weird stuff that's come up since about investments in Chinese companies in the Cayman Islands vesting while he will be FBI director. If the guy is supposed to be investigating Chinese intrusion into our intelligence faculties, if we're trying to investigate Chinese fentanyl trafficking into our country, why do we want an FBI director who is somewhere between $1 and $5 million into a Chinese company through a Cayman Islands shell? And then there are the Russia connections. I'll get to those at the end. We don't have to, where everybody's fond of saying these are Democratic smears. Actually, go to the Trump appointees who worked with this guy. What are they warning us? They're warning us Trump National Security Advisor John Bolton. I didn't think he was qualified. I was forced to hire him. That's some recommendation from a colleague. His deputy, Charles Kupperman. Patel's ideas are ludicrous. He's absolutely unqualified for this job, untrustworthy, an absolute disgrace to even consider an individual of this nature. Definitely you want that on your resume by way of a recommendation from a former supervisor. Attorney General Barr said Patel has virtually no experience that would qualify him to be the deputy director of the FBI. And now he's back as the director of the FBI. And Trump's CIA director, Gina Haspel, threatened to resign rather than allow this guy into her office as her deputy. And if you go beyond the Trump appointees who are warning us about this guy, you can go to the last time he testified in court, which was in Colorado. And here's what the court found about him. That Patel was not a credible witness, that his testimony was illogical, and it was completely devoid of any evidence in the record. Okay, I've been an attorney general, and I've been a United States attorney, and I've put state police troopers on the stand, and I've put FBI agents on the stand. If at the end of a case, a judge made findings like this about a law enforcement witness that I put on the stand, there would be follow-up. I would want an explanation of why this witness was so incredible that findings like that were made by the judge. It would be a significant issue with respect to that witness's continued performance in office. And here's a guy who's been found to be completely incredible by a judge in his testimony, and we're acting as if that's nothing. That's not Democrats. That's a judge in Colorado. So the last thing I'll say is I think we need to begin to prepare ourselves for Trump-Russia 2.0. The Trump-Russia thing was, I'm not going to go back all over it, fully ventilated in the Senate Bipartisan Intelligence Report, in the Mueller report. Trump-Russia was a thing. We stopped talking about it, but Trump kept talking about it and saying it was a hoax. Trump-Russia hoax, Trump-Russia hoax. No, it was not a hoax. It was real. It was there. There's a record. Part of it was bipartisan work. Some of it was done in the House. There was an abundance of evidence about the Trump-Russia connection. And now what are we seeing? We're seeing Patel coming in, who says he wants to wreck the FBI's what he called intel shop, which is the part of the FBI that looks at Russia and does counterintelligence work against Russia. He said that he wants to close out the DC office and send everybody out into the field. Well, it's the DC office, not the field offices, that do the counterintelligence work. You want to shut it down? You're opening your arms to Russian intelligence operations. You go just across to the Attorney General's office, and there's Attorney General Bondi. What's the first thing she does when she gets in? Closes all the kleptocrature and kleptocracy investigation offices of the Department of Justice. Gee, who were they pursuing? Putin and his oligarchs. You shut down the group that has successfully grabbed assets off Putin's crooked oligarchs. What a signal that is. And then look at Tulsi Gabbard. I'm not going to go through the whole length of her Russia associations, but let's just say that a Russian news media editorial said that her appointment should cause the CIA and the FBI to tremble because she was a friend to Russia. Who defends us against Russian intelligence operations and Russia's criminal operations in the United States? It's the FBI, it's the Department of Justice, and it's our intelligence community. The people in charge of each one, powerful signals that they are shutting down our people in charge of each one, powerful signals that they are shutting down our defenses when it comes to unilateral disarmament to throw Ukraine under the bus and give Putin what he wants. So mark my words. This Patel guy will come back to haunt you. Every piece of evidence shows that, and it is not Democrat evidence. It's his own words, it's his own colleagues, and it's judges evaluating his credibility. And Trump Russia is going to come roaring back if it's not already back. We should be on our guard about this nominee, and we should be on our guard about Trump Russia. Thank you, Chairman.
Senator Klobuchar.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I oppose the confirmation of Kash Patel to serve as the next director of the FBI. The director of the FBI leads our nation's most important law enforcement agency, made up of more than 38,000 employees. I have tremendous respect for the men and women of the FBI. They take on violent crime. They get fentanyl off our streets. In our state, they have investigated incredibly complex matters, including a case a few years back that was the biggest white-collar case outside of Madoff for years. They have done such a good job, and we are proud of them. I have supported FBI directors under Republican presidents, including President Trump's last nominee, and Democratic presidents. The nonpartisan career public servants at the FBI risk their lives to keep us safe. Their motto, FBI, fidelity, bravery, and integrity. And they deserve a director who respects the work that they do and who embodies the core values of the FBI. That, unfortunately, is not Kash Patel. Let's start with fidelity. A director's loyalty to the American people, the Constitution, and the rule of law is paramount. But Mr. Patel made it abundantly clear that he is loyal to the president, and that is his calls for retribution. When you look back at Mr. Patel's writings, at his interviews, at what he has done in his life, that his focus is the loyalty to the president and not to the people of this country. Mr. Patel has threatened the president's critics. As he said, I quote his words, not just in the government, but in the media, end quote. On one podcast in December 2023, he said, and I quote, "We're going to come after you, whether it's criminally or civilly." On a podcast just last August, I know sometimes our colleagues, we have writings or we have interviews of people that are 10, 15 years ago. These are all recent. Just this August, he said, when Trump wins in 2024 and is in power in 2025, we can prosecute them, referring to Justice Department officials. And when I asked him about it in my written questions, he replied about that comment. He replied that, quote, he made those comments in a television interview, not in a court of law or before the committee, as if the venue minimizes the threat. And in fact, at his hearing before this committee, he had opportunity to walk back that threat and others. He chose not to. Nor did he try to explain his so-called deep state list of former government officials, including many Republicans who served in the last Trump administration, including Attorney General Barr, who Republicans on this committee have repeatedly commended for his service. But he is on, Barr is on Kash Patel's deep state list. He also criticized former CIA Director Gina Haspel, numerous elected officials, including the former head of Veterans Affairs, Dennis McDonough. I remind our colleagues on the other side of the aisle that Bill Barr had said about Patel this: Patel has virtually no experience that would qualify him to serve at the highest level of the world's preeminent law enforcement agency. And his appointment to the FBI, he said a few years back when Patel was being considered for another job in the FBI, his appointment to the FBI would only happen, Barr's words, over his dead body. Then CIA Director Gina Haspel also threatened to resign to stop Patel from being her deputy. These and many others who have criticized him over time are people who have served our country. I didn't always agree with some of them. Some are Democrats, some are Republicans. but they have repeatedly said the same thing, that he should not be running the FBI. And we know what Mr. Patel wants to do with the people on that list because he already told us on another podcast episode. He said the people on his list need to go to prison. That is a shocking statement from someone who may be the next head of the FBI. And it's not just government officials, but the press as well. As you know, Mr. Chairman, I care deeply about an independent press and the First Amendment. Mr. Patel, though, has referred to the media as, quote, the most powerful enemy the United States has ever seen. He didn't even say that one on a podcast. He said it in a speech at the Conservative Political Action Conference on February 23rd, 2024. Think about that. He is saying that the press, with many here standing up for the First Amendment, he's saying the press is the most powerful enemy the United States has ever had. Not China, not Russia, not Iran, not terrorists, but he says the most powerful enemy is the press. And I would ask my colleagues how they can justify voting for this man who would say such a thing as the director of the FBI that constantly deals with domestic threats that come from afar and come from people who are, in fact, affiliated with terrorist groups in these countries. How do we know Mr. Patel will carry out the revenge agenda? Well, it is already occurring. At his hearing, Mr. Patel did say, quote, all FBI employees will be protected against political retribution. And yet, mere hours after those remarks, the administration forced out 8 of the Bureau's most senior career public servants who serve in nonpartisan roles. One day later, an email was sent to FBI employees requesting a list of everyone who had worked on January 6 cases to determine whether any additional personnel actions are necessary. That's their quote. Think about this. Thousands of agents, maybe people who had just joined the FBI, are asked to work on a case. It happens all the time. Anyone in a workplace knows what I am talking about. But in this case, if you are affiliated with any kind of case that Mr. Patel did not like in the past, well, then you need to be on some list. They get assigned to a case because a violent felony occurred on January 6th. Everyone in this room that was there know exactly what I'm talking about. People assaulted police officers. And now those agents who were simply doing their job find themselves on a list for personnel action. That is not right. That will not make Americans safe, and that will destroy the Federal Bureau of Investigation. This isn't fidelity to the Constitution. This isn't fidelity to the rule of law and impartial law enforcement. It is an affront to it. That's fidelity. Second, bravery. Let's talk about bravery. Now, we all know that Capitol Police showed bravery far and above the call of duty on January 6, 2021. Every one of the members of this committee have talked about the fact that the police officers protected us and were brave. But rather than recognize the officers' bravery, Mr. Patel accused those who testified, officers, on January 6th of lying. When asked if Capitol Police officers told the truth in the January 6th committee hearings, Mr. Patel said, and I quote, no, and lying under oath is a federal offense and they should be investigated for it. Yet he claimed at his hearing that this wasn't accurate. We have it on tape. It's literally on YouTube on the Joe Pack Show, 5/29/2024 at minute 2:57. You know who else exemplifies bravery? The men and women at the FBI who every day put their lives on the line and keep us safe. What does Kash Patel think of these public servants? He wrote that, again, I quote, the FBI has become so thoroughly compromised that it will remain a threat to the people unless drastic measures are taken, end quote. He has called the men and women who keep us safe, quote, utterly corrupt, and called for a, quote, comprehensive housekeeping, end quote, of the FBI. That's from his book, page 73 and page 85. He also called for shutting down the FBI headquarters. And you know what happens at that headquarters? This is where they coordinate the investigation of complex cases, including terrorism and cybercrime. Happened on the Sean Ryan Show, 9/2/2024. What are the facts? Under Christopher Wray's leadership, who was a Trump appointee, the morale of the agents and personnel at the FBI has improved significantly. 3 times as many people are applying to the FBI under Christopher Wray's leadership and during his term than when he started. 3 times the number. How can you say there's some horrible corruption? People actually want to go work there. They want to be an FBI agent. They think that it is a job of public service, that is an honorable job. I don't think the FBI is a threat to the people or utterly corrupt, as Kash Patel has said, and I actually don't think our colleagues on the Republican side of the aisle believe this either. I think that they admire the people that work at the FBI. The men and women of the FBI show us every day what it means to embody bravery, and now we need to show them that we can be brave as well and tell the president no. And if our colleagues on the Republican side on this committee will not join us in just saying no one time to the president, maybe some of them will join us in the greater Senate body on the floor. So that brings us to integrity, FBI. The FBI runs on facts. It runs on truth. Without truth, the whole system breaks down. And Mr. Patel in his hearing made abundantly clear why this nation should be so concerned about putting someone in this job for whom there is such a lack of trust. Mr. Patel did not even have the integrity to stand by his own words to this committee. His own words. Repeatedly, I asked about these statements. Own them, man. Just say, yeah, I said it. I believe that. I believe we should shut down the FBI headquarters. I believe they're all corrupt. These are things that he has said, not 10 years ago, not when he was a student, in the last year. Instead of disavowing or providing the explanations for reckless past statements, Kash Patel repeatedly misled this committee, dodged questions, and claimed ignorance, despite the fact that all of his statements are on the record for all of us to see. How can we have an FBI director that doesn't even remember what he said 6 months ago? The director of our nation's most powerful law enforcement agency must be forthright and trustworthy. He must follow the facts and carefully analyze evidence before drawing conclusions. Mr. Patel has made clear that his allegiance is not to the truth. He has put ideology and his loyalty to Donald Trump ahead of the facts. Mr. Chairman, independence of the FBI from the White House is critical. The FBI director has immense power to direct surveillance, investigate American citizens, and recommend when charges be brought. The next director's loyalty must be to the people and not the president. And even if someone was to put in someone who is their friend, which has happened in these jobs in the past, why would you pick this person who has repeatedly maligned the agents that work at the FBI? Why would you pick someone who in the last year decided to make money off of hawking a supplement that he claimed would reverse the effects of the COVID vaccine? Why would you put someone in place that thinks it's fun to say you should close down the headquarters and has put together a list of people that he hates, that he says he wants to take revenge on? Why would you pick that person of all the people you could pick for this office that maybe you even know or you've worked with before? But Donald Trump picked this person. And I think we know why. The fact is, federal law enforcement and the American people deserve a director who embodies the Bureau's model: fidelity, bravery, integrity. The men and the women of the FBI deserve better than this nominee. And I ask our Republican colleagues to stand up for the agents that work there and to stand up and say no once.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm speaking today on why I will vote against Kash Patel as the nominee to be director of the FBI. The FBI, as my colleagues have spoken to at length, is one of the world's most important, powerful, and respected law enforcement agencies. And the tens of thousands of agents who serve us all across our nation are a key bulwark against terrorism, against extremism, against crimes that range from the theft of intellectual property to interstate gangs that carry out human trafficking or murder for hire. The FBI is an absolutely critical part of our nation's security, and it rests on trust. It rests on having an independent leader. Back to the dark days of J. Edgar Hoover being a politically connected and compromised FBI leader, in the decades since his tenure ended, we have engaged in a disciplined, balanced, bipartisan process to confirm FBI directors for long terms, 10-year terms. And I have voted for Republican nominees put forward by Republican presidents. We need, as director of the FBI, someone who will stand up for the men and women of this incredible law enforcement agency. And in his testimony before this committee and in his comments and actions before coming in front of this committee, Kash Patel has shown that he is not that leader. He is already actively undermining the bureau he seeks to lead. As someone who is the co-chair of the Law Enforcement Caucus and who spent years leading, supervising, responsible for the second largest law enforcement agency in my state, I see in Mr. Patel an alarming willingness to do the bidding of a vengeful White House. As you heard from my colleague, Senator Durbin, whistleblowers are alleging that he has already helped orchestrate the purge of the most senior leadership of the FBI, as well as those agents who were simply doing their job as assigned to them to carry out January 6th investigations. This purge is only the start of what I fear is about to come. The FBI has demanded that, the administration has demanded that the FBI turn over a list of its newest recruits and employees, has pushed out the head of the Washington field office and other top leadership, and is giving roles to folks who lack the relevant professional experience. The FBI needs independence, but Mr. Patel told me when I asked him that he believes the FBI works for the White House. I asked that same question of several other recent nominees, and they gave the correct answer, that federal law enforcement, whether the Department of Justice or the FBI, works for the Constitution and the American people. The FBI doesn't work for the White House. It works for all of us. Attorney General Pam Bondi got that question right. Todd Blanche and Gail Slater got that question right in their hearing yesterday. How is it that Kash Patel flunked that easiest and most central question? Not just to whom do you report, but for whom do you serve? As I said, we've seen what a dark chapter can be when the FBI is led by someone who is politically connected and by whom he politically corrupts the goals and purpose of the FBI. And I fear that we are heading into one of those chapters again. As I questioned him during his confirmation, I asked Mr. Patel if he, like his predecessors, would be willing to resign rather than take an unconstitutional or illegal action if ordered by the president. He refused to answer that question. I asked him if he would resign if President Trump asked him to go after a political enemy, and he refused to answer that question. I asked him if he would resign if the president asked him to block an investigation due to political considerations, and he refused to answer. These are questions that I asked of Directors Comey and Wray, and that they answered. If Patel refuses to answer these simple questions, questions that I think are rooted in recent developments and in his repeated public statements, questions that his predecessors have answered clearly, forcefully, and appropriately, how can we trust him to lead the FBI? I implore my Republican colleagues to reconsider the step I believe they are about to take to confirm this man to lead one of our most important elements of our law enforcement community. Around the world, our security depends on trust and reliability, and the national security role of the FBI director, the ways in which our FBI is critical to the work of our intelligence community and our military and others overseas as they work to keep us safe, cannot be overlooked. The men and women of the FBI deserve better than Kash Patel. to lead an agency whose watchwords are fidelity, bravery.
About is the
To all three. Americans deserve better than Kash Patel. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator. Thank you. Oh, Senator. Well, I was told no Republicans wanted to talk, and then I was told, so you're next then. Go ahead.
We have a letter here. Letter.
Oh, yeah. And Senator Urban, go ahead. And then I'm going to call on Senator from Connecticut.
I'd like to enter into the record this letter of opposition of Mr. Patel from the Society for the Rule of Law Institute. They describe themselves as a group of conservative lawyers and jurists who have served at the highest levels of government in previous Republican administration. They include Judge Michael Luttig and Peter Kiesler, a co-founder of the Federalist Society and acting Attorney General during George W. Bush's administration.
Yeah. Without objection, it will be placed on the record. No objection heard. Go ahead, Senator from Connecticut.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to begin on a positive note and take advantage of the chairman's reference to whistleblowers and our mutual support over the years for them. I hope that the chairman will join me, along with other members of the committee, when we introduce, or I should say reintroduce, the Congressional Whistleblower Protection Act. This measure would expand the protections that are afforded to whistleblowers at a time when we've never needed them more. And I'm going to reintroduce it, I hope, with the support of my colleagues on the committee who have joined me previously, Senators Hirono, Klobuchar, Padilla, and Whitehouse, as well as other colleagues such as Cortez Masto, Wyden, Markey, and Tammy Baldwin. This measure is an important one, and I hope that the chairman will join me, because he has been a champion in the past of whistleblower protection, and the amount of protection must be expanded so that these truth tellers will have the safeguards needed to assure them that there will be no retaliation against them. And on that note, I want to begin in a way personally, talk about the FBI. First of all, just to say thank you to all of the FBI agents. There are 17,000 special agents out there right now, a total of 38,000 civil servants in the FBI. They are probably not listening to what we're saying here, because they are looking into international and domestic terrorism, cyber criminal syndicates, foreign espionage, organized criminal enterprises, including drug cartels, sexual exploitation, and human trafficking. Now, I have not been without criticism of the FBI. And the chairman has said that there is a need for reform. I'm betting that members of the FBI would join in saying there's always room for improvement, but it should not be by someone who vilifies the FBI, as Kash Patel has done. He has said about the FBI that it is a powerful and cunning part of the deep state. Someone who begins with that kind of antagonism and hostility to the FBI will not be able to engage in positive and constructive reform. I've worked with agents of the FBI since I was U.S. Attorney. And I'll never forget the agent who sat with me at counsel table as I tried my first criminal case, practically carrying me through the presentation of evidence and the rules of federal procedure, which he knew as well as I did. The FBI is a premier law enforcement institution for our country, and we should seek to enhance it and improve it, but not to slash and trash it, which is what Kash Patel seems to want to do. A lot has been mentioned about what Kash Patel refused to answer. But I want to go to what he very clearly did answer, which is he committed, in response to my question, that there would be no retribution against any FBI agent, that there would be no mass firing, and no purging of leadership. And now we have reliable information from whistleblowers submitted in a letter by Senator Durbin to the chairman that in fact, he has been covertly and personally directing a purge of senior leadership and other non-political agents simply because they were assigned to investigate criminal wrongdoing. In direct contradiction of the commitments he made to us, not just to me, it was my question, but to this committee. And that is one of the reasons why I have urged that the chairman call him back, give him a chance to explain that kind of contradiction. What we're left with is a record that shows that he, in effect, wants to turn the FBI into a sycophantic goon squad that would crush political opposition, go after an enemies list. Of course, he calls them government gangsters, not an enemies list. But let me warn members of this committee who are critical of Kash Patel, we will be on that list. And he has the power to investigate anyone who is critical of him. He said there should be a manhunt for those government gangsters. He's telegraphed very clearly how he would use the FBI, and the more so if he is independent of the White House and of the Department of Justice, as clearly he envisions his role to be. He will be an unrestrained, unguided missile against the integrity of the Department of Justice and our justice system. The work of the FBI is essential to judgment and integrity. Kash Patel lacks those two key qualities. He is trafficked in conspiracy theories. He agrees with, quote, a lot of what QAnon says. He engages in election denialism, refusing to say President Biden won the 2020 election. He's even suggested that the FBI planned the January 6th insurrection and attack on the Capitol. He has glorified the January 6th rioters, calling them political prisoners, even the rioters who attacked Capitol Police. He produced a song with the so-called J6 choir. Those were individuals in prison for having attacked police officers. He tried to deny that he had produced the song at his nomination hearing in response to my question, saying, quote, I didn't have anything to do with the recording, end quote. But in response to my questions for the record, he acknowledged that he is one of the producers of the song. He couldn't have denied it because he boasted about it on a podcast. How could he have nothing to do with the recording if he's one of the producers? Let's just be very direct. He was less than truthful to this committee about his role because he knew that his actions amplifying and glorifying the cause of violent criminals who attack police would be an embarrassing obstacle to his confirmation. Only one of the ways that he experienced a confirmation conversion And looking at the members of that J6 choir, you can well understand why he wanted to disavow any connection with them. Julian Cater, who pepper sprayed the U.S. Capitol Police Officer Brian Sicknick, who died the next day. Ryan Nichols, who pushed the crowd against officers defending a door to the Capitol and sprayed officers with pepper spray. James McGrew, who pushed and struck officers and launched a handrail at them. Political prisoners, worthy of glorification? Not by the future director of the FBI, certainly. And Kash Patel has certainly shown that he is vindictive, focusing on seeking revenge rather than keeping America safe. That enemies list is only one of the ways that he may well seek retribution against his opponents. And going after President Trump's political enemies is clearly on this administration's agenda, indeed a priority. Just look at what Pam Bondi did on day one. She ordered the creation of a so-called weaponization working group, a weaponization working group, and specifically named people who would be investigated. Just coincidentally, Jack Smith, Letitia James, Alvin Bragg. They've led legitimate prosecutions and lawsuits against Donald Trump. That's the true weaponization of DOJ and the FBI, and something that must be stopped right away. And now is the time to do it with this nomination, to stop retribution and revenge in the Department of Justice as a priority and a modus operandi, and to send a message that it won't be tolerated. Kash Patel is out for himself, even if it means putting other people's lives in danger. Whistleblowers have said that Kash Patel broke protocol during a hostage rescue mission, leaking details to the press before the hostages were safe in American custody. And during a different hostage rescue mission, former Defense Secretary Mark Esper and said Kash Patel lied about receiving permission from the Nigerian government to enter their airspace. This kind of carelessness could have caused those Navy SEAL hostage rescuers to be shot down. He is not to be trusted with the nation's most important secrets or with the most important law enforcement agency of our nation. Kash Patel pled the Fifth in a case about Donald Trump's handling of classified documents. He's entitled to plead the Fifth Amendment. He eventually testified after prosecutors granted him limited immunity. He's not entitled to deny us the truth of what he told the grand jury as a part of this confirmation proceeding. He had the ability, legal and physical, to tell us what he told the grand jury. We all know, all of us who have prosecuted, that grand jury witnesses are told you can talk about it if you wish. Sometimes they're discouraged from talking about their testimony, but they have the legal right to do so. He had the legal right to tell us about his testimony, but he refused to do it. And he aided us only marginally in seeking that grand jury testimony, which I still feel we need to see, along with the second volume of the Jack Smith report. I want to close by saying that we have a pretty good idea of what the outcome will be today. And I am appalled that my Republican colleagues are prepared to confirm a man so publicly hostile to the agency, its people, its goals, its mission that he intends to lead. We have a responsibility here. Willful ignorance and support of Kash Patel will turn the FBI potentially into a sycophantic goon squad ready to crush political opposition instead of the independent law enforcement agency that the nation needs and deserves. These votes will haunt my Republican colleagues. They will come back to haunt them when Kash Patel does even a fraction of what we have warned about his doing, and the American people should hold them accountable. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the time today to speak in favor of Kash Patel. As I've listened to my Democratic colleagues and their comments this morning, you can hear the anger and the displeasure with having Kash Patel before us. But I think it's important to realize why Kash Patel is there and why President Trump chose to nominate Kash Patel. The American people are sick and tired of 2 tiers of access, 2 tiers of treatment, and 2 tiers of justice. And during the Biden years, this was writ large in the actions of the DOJ and the FBI. We have all seen it. And while my colleagues may be upset for today, I think it's important to note that they sat silently while you had parents and people of faith and so many that were being confronted. And this happened over and over and over. So I know they're trying to stall and obstruct, but it is important to note that the American people on November 5th voted to see change. They want transparency and accountability. They want the end of 2 tiers of justice. And they want to restore faith in our American institutions. Now, Pam Bondi, who is our Attorney General, has been mentioned several times this morning. She is going about aggressively restoring confidence and sending that message that the rule of law matters. The rule of law matters. And there is an expectation that people will abide by the rule of law. And Kash Patel will work with her in restoring that confidence, that rule of law, rooting out the 2-tier system of justice that the American people have witnessed. Now, when Mr. Patel was before us, before I started my questioning, I asked him a question that came from listening to my Democratic colleagues as they were questioning him. And it was, why do the Democrats fear him? Why do they fear him? And I think the answer is so very apparent. They fear him because, yes, indeed, he is out of the box. They fear him because of what he knows about Russia collusion, what he knows about some of the activity that has taken place. And they fear him because he is going to return the FBI to its core mission, investigating violent crimes and keeping our nation safe. Now, I'm pleased that he's going to focus on violent crime. We know that under President Trump, violent crime was down 17%. This is important to us in Tennessee. In Memphis, we have had quite an issue with violent crime, much of it caused by a lack of attention to prosecuting some of these gang members. There is a Soros-backed DA in Memphis that will not push these cases through. But violent crime under Joe Biden was up 43% in his first year. It is imperative that the FBI go back to investigating these crimes and go back to the Trump policy of investigating and prosecuting these criminals and bringing that transparency back to the justice system. So I'm so pleased that we're moving forward with him today. I'm also pleased, Mr. Chairman, that he is going to work with me to make certain we know who all was involved with Jeffrey Epstein in building out this international sex trafficking ring. This is information we have sought. It is information we have not been able to get. And as the next FBI director, I have no doubt that he is going to work with us to end this scourge of human and sex trafficking in the United States. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't think the American people were up in arms about purging the Department of Justice or the FBI. I don't think they were up in arms wanting a stop to or freeze to federal grants to states. I don't think they were up in arms calling for the NIH to take action that will result in the halting of medical research. No, what they were up in arms was, let's lower the price of food, milk, bread. They're still waiting. So here we are, Mr. Chairman, talking about the nomination of Kash Patel. This man has so many red flags about why it is completely inappropriate to have him as the head of one of our most important law enforcement agencies, that it makes your head spin. One thing is very clear about Kash Patel. He has 100% loyalty to Trump. That is the most critical thing for President Trump. We are at a crisis point, and this committee, if it plans to conduct any oversight, it must do so now. And here's what's happening at the FBI. Dozens of senior career FBI and DOJ employees have been purged. More to come. 5,000 names of agents and personnel who worked on January 6 matters. Their names are there. What is supposed to happen to these people? I don't think they're going to get commended for their work on January 6th. So hundreds or thousands of line prosecutors and FBI special agents and analysts may be purged. Make no mistake, our nation is under constant threat, both foreign and domestic. And purging hardworking and dedicated civil servants does nothing to make us safe. So what is happening with the FBI and DOJ is they've turned inward. Rather than focusing on potential attacks, hacks, or violent criminal enterprises, we have a DOJ and FBI that has been turned inward on themselves. Attorney General Bondi's announcement to weaponize in creating a weaponization working group last week only continues this trend. Through this working group, she is doing what she told us she would not do. And that is, we asked her, are you going to start investigating the investigators, prosecuting the prosecutors? What is this weaponization working group supposed to be doing but investigating the investigators and prosecuting the prosecutors, turning inward on itself rather than protecting this country from external dangers? I fear what a DOJ and FBI focused inward on themselves means for the safety and security of our nation. Not much. Which brings me to Mr. Patel. He is not the man to answer the many challenges of the moment. Mr. Patel spent his nomination hearing avoiding every hard question. I asked him if he would investigate people on his 60-person deep state list. He would not say no. Mr. Chairman, we are sitting here continuing to point out all the red flags on this person. We Democrats are going to continue to raise the red flags on this person. And at some point, I'm hoping that maybe we'll come to a have decency moment from my Republican colleagues. Continuing, I asked him if he profited from selling supplements to detox the COVID-19 vaccines. He did not answer. I asked him if Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. He would not answer. He claimed not to know an anti-Semitic extremist named Stu Peters, despite appearing 8 times on his podcast. See, the fact that he doesn't even answer, remember, whatever, it makes me think that he thinks coming before this committee under oath is something that he could just ignore with no consequences. And apparently that is the road we're on. And he tried to claim no involvement with the January 6th choir, despite promoting them and hawking their merchandise for years. And he was unwilling to provide any details about his grand jury testimony he was compelled to give after taking the fifth. People who take the fifth are using it to protect themselves from self-incrimination. Of course, Mr. Patel has the same right as any American to plead the fifth, but we have an equal right to ask him, as the nominee for FBI director, no less, why he did so and to learn what he ultimately testified. The one thing Mr. Patel did testify to in response to a question from Senator Booker, I thank Senator Booker for asking his question about whether he was, quote, aware of any plans or discussions to punish FBI agents or personnel associated with Trump investigations, and was whether he said he was not aware of that. But we note that in fact he had an awareness, and in fact he's proceeding to purge the FBI. He's not even the director. I join my colleagues in once again calling for us to actually get the answers from Mr. Patel. The American people deserve to know where he's coming from. This is a person who's going to use the FBI for his own purposes. He will abuse his power in the FBI, and we have had my colleagues say that we will regret the day that we voted for him. We should be regretting it right at this moment. And we should be calling him back so that the American people can find out what it is that this man plans to do as he intends to very clearly abuse his power at the FBI, all for his own ends and for that of the president, to which he is 100% loyal. That is his biggest qualification to be FBI director, which is not much in my view. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Speak, just so everybody knows, we're planning to vote at 11, and they're going to hold they said they'd hold the vote open, at least for me, so I assume that's everybody, so that you can all be here. So I don't know whether it's after Moody gets done or Booker gets done, but if we're all here, I don't want to interrupt somebody's speech, but so if you want to vote a little bit earlier, or just say, or let me interrupt you, whatever the case might be, just think about that. Go ahead, Senator Moody.
Yes, Chair, thank you so much. And I had planned to come today and vote in support of the nominee, but I feel it incumbent upon me, as I've heard speaker after speaker talk about and presume to speak for the rank and file FBI agents across this nation, as someone who has worked hand in hand as a federal prosecutor myself, as someone who has been a state attorney general and had to work with and then ultimately sue the FBI when they refused to work with us on the second assassination attempt. And as someone who has married a rank and file federal agent and witnessed firsthand how they have taken what we have seen over the last 4 years, I think it's incumbent upon me to say no one here, including myself, can speak for the rank and file FBI. But what I can say is watching what has happened over the last 4 years and watching the legal system being used to go after political adversaries, rank and file want to get back to doing their jobs of going after multi-jurisdictional criminals, of working hand in hand with state and law enforcement, of bringing to bear the promise of a country and a free people living under a rule of law that is effectually enforced. And I have to say, I disagree with many people who have said that the morale of FBI will go down if this nominee is confirmed. In fact, I believe quite the opposite. I believe they're ready to stand up and fight and get to work on mission critical cases, and the morale will in fact go up. I have heard that Kash Patel is out for himself. If that is true, he is out for himself as an American, as someone who believes in the promise of this country, of what its agencies have been created to ensure, and that is to protect the people and their rights, the autonomy of our states. And I believe he will bring to bear that passion and enthusiasm and love of country as the FBI director. I have heard one of my colleagues say, "Why would you pick this person?" and quoted all kinds of things that he has said. Indeed, he is passionate in his love and his demonstration of love for this country. And maybe that is because he has served as a federal prosecutor and a public defender and a chief of staff for the Secretary of Defense and a deputy assistant to the President, senior director of counterterrorism on the National Security Council, and as principal deputy to the acting director of national intelligence. Maybe it is through all those roles he has seen what this country has the ability to do to protect its people, and it has seen agencies go down the wrong path.
Apologize for the glitch here, people. We're working on it right now to get this back and running. After the Kash Patel segment here, we will be going to RFK Jr. So you guys can see what's going on.
He has said,
right now we're working on getting this up and running. So give us this quick second. Absolutely. I mean, I love reading the comments from everyone here on this beautiful Thursday morning. It's a reminder. These hearings are a reminder of why Trump got elected. The absolute, incompetence. Is it even incompetence, or is someone just writing the script for them? I mean, that's honestly what it feels like, is that that one Hawaiian senator is literally just reading. And I don't think she wrote it. Spin arm, exactly what you said there. Democrats.
and you have to have an FBI director that is focused and targeted in attention to make sure that those individuals are sought after and rounded up. Indeed, DAs, mayors, commissioners, governors, they don't care about the rule of law and allowed crime to explode. You have to have an FBI director that will fill that gap. You have to have an FBI director that understands the mission, understands national criminal organizations, and the FBI has the jurisdiction to go after those folks. You used the word and the description skunk at a picnic, that is how whistleblowers are treated. To some extent, when these new leaders get into these agencies and they're coming in with an objective view, a fresh perspective, wanting to do right by this country, it may be there are people in those agencies that need to scatter, that need to leave. if they have lost focus of the mission of the agency,
You want to learn new data skills.
on who they are serving, this country and its people, they do need to go. And any director or any head of agency that we confirm as a Senate needs to go into those positions with that in mind. And I believe that is why Kash Patel will be confirmed by the Senate.
I'm just trying to see, are you encouraging me to talk longer? Because that's never happened in this committee before. I will try to go as quickly as possible. And just say that this is one of the more perplexing nominees for me personally. I've seen the pendulum swing back and forth in this committee now over 11 years. I've seen my colleagues on the other side of the aisle rightfully take up a politically charged tweet about a nominee, whether it's for the bench or for significant offices like this one, as have we. I've seen back and forth, but I've just never seen something like this for a candidate, and I'm surprised that there's not more people who are calling some of this out in the most objective way possible. I do not understand how we're moving forward at this point. It seems like we are. It seems like it's a fait accompli, because I was just told the vote is coming. But I just want to go through some of the things that, to me, are sort of stunning that we are dealing with. First and foremost, this idea of FBI employees, these incredible agents that we all respect, that were involved in a lawful investigation of criminal violations of federal law, or that federal law that was protecting us and our national security, that these folks are being targeted. And we know that is happening. I asked Mr. Patel if he knew of any plans to punish or retaliate against FBI agents and employees who worked on cases that President Trump didn't like. He claimed he didn't, but he should not be really believed. Not only because this is a history of lying that we've seen, but because the facts that we've been presented as a committee suggest different. The timing of the FBI purges, moments after the hearing we had, to me seems like an obvious implication upon this nominee. Ranking Member Durbin uncovered compelling evidence that Patel didn't just know about the FBI's plans to fire agents who were doing their job as directed, but that Patel not only knew about it, but he directed the purge as an outside citizen. And if that's true, Mr. Patel has perjured himself before this committee, something I believe we would take very seriously. His trustworthiness is evident in his failure to disclose his work on behalf of the Embassy of Qatar to this committee. That is stunning. Work for which he possibly broke the law when he didn't file as a foreign agent. These are entanglements that this committee should take seriously, that we should investigate before moving forward. The financial disclosures we received after our hearing that we did not have a chance to ask him about show that Mr. Patel actually enriched himself by doing work for groups linked to Russia and China, foreign adversaries of our nation. I can't believe I need to say this, that as if it may be a question, but at a bare minimum, our FBI director should not have conflicts of interest with the Chinese Communist Party and Vladimir Putin, and we should have had a chance to ask him about that in open committee. That is just the most basic due diligence. Look, everything Mr. Patel has ever written and said, so much of, what he's written and said demonstrates that he is somebody that goes against the idea of integrity and independence that the FBI wants. He has gone far, as my colleagues have said, posting the most outrageous politically charged things. I'm disbelief that of all the incredible people that could run this agency, that this is somebody that we would pick. But my concerns really have to do about Mr. Patel's testimony before this committee. No one can claim surprise when he does exactly what he's promised to do in a lot of these politically charged writings. We have credible evidence that he is already enacting this idea of revenge against of revenge against FBI agents who Mr. Trump does not like. We have credible evidence that he committed perjury when he told this committee that he wasn't aware of these plans to fire FBI personnel. He later changed his answer when answering the committee's questions for the record. Suddenly he said he went from I don't know to I don't recall whether he plans to fire FBI personnel. And this was what he was saying over and over again. He does not recall. I don't recall. Not long ago, the fact that he lied about not knowing a white nationalist podcaster when he appeared on his podcast, not one time, not 3 times, not 5 times, but he appeared on his podcast 8 times. Yet he said he did not know who this person was or did not remember. This to me is a continued pattern that is disqualifying. It would be, to me, something all of our colleagues in this room would say, hey man, you're not being straight, honest with this committee. Listen, lies like this are misleading and dishonest, especially with an institution that has a reputation for that kind of integrity. His refusals to share what he said before the grand jury is another example of, to me, unacceptable unacceptable non-answering. His case about handling sensitive national security documents. It's the kind of information FBI directors are responsible for safeguarding. He played a role in that. He spoke before a grand jury. His testimony should be something shared with this committee. And his alarming bad memory about what he testified, to me, is just incredible. When asked whether he discussed with the firing of the assistant director of counterterrorism, he said, not that I recall. Did you know that the FBI officials and rank and file agents would be fired before he testified? Not that I recall. Were you aware of the review of FBI personnel who worked on January 6 cases? Not that I recall. Can anyone with a straight face sit here and say that that is an answer, that he is not misleading this committee? This is unbelievable if he doesn't recall that. In fact, his inability to recall such information, to me, speaks against his qualifications for a job if he's not recalling things of such importance. This committee should ask for better from this, from any nominee, from a Democrat or Republican president. This is stunning to me. We are here to serve the American people and their interest. This person has obfuscated, has lied, has shown an utter lack of character and straightforwardness with this committee. It is just obvious to me, of all the people that this president has nominated, I voted for many of them. This stands apart from what this committee should demand from anyone coming before it. I appreciate the desire to defer to a president on their nominees. This is why I have voted for many of Mr. Trump's nominees in this time that he has become elected president. But it is our constitutional duty to ensure that the president's nominees are fit for public office. This vote should not boil down to partisanship. It should really be about the objective understanding of someone who has performed and testified in this manner should be allowed to ascend without further questioning, further investigation of some of these issues that I brought up. I am very disappointed by this moment. I'm actually stunned by the fact that we are going to have a straight party line vote on someone who is so clearly unqualified for this office, who so clearly misled this committee, who so clearly has many areas of his background that this committee has not thoroughly explored that point to some serious potential for conflicts or worse. But with that, in hopes that I am trying to keep my testimony, my comments under 5 minutes, which I have failed to do, but I am concluding, sir. Mr. Chairman, I am stunned and perplexed at this moment that I have been asked to talk for 2 minutes. For the record, the chairman has said that I make a lot of sense. But he disagrees with me. Yeah. Mr. Chairman, I'm going to cede to you. If you would like to filibuster, you're welcome to. I'm sure that the committee of this committee would allow you to sit here quietly. But if not, I would very much like to hear Lindsey Graham speak on the virtues of the great state of New Jersey. Wow.
New Jersey.
Wow.
My brother-in-law is from New Jersey and we like him a lot.
That I will take that as a testimony. Thank you, sir.
And happy birthday to Dick Blumenthal.
The Senate rules limit the time for committee meetings, and so I need to call the roll call vote. I will allow anyone who still wishes to speak on this nomination to do so after we vote. On the favorably reporting the nomination of Kash Patel to be Director of Federal Bureau of Investigation, the clerk will call the roll.
Aye.
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 Aye. Mr. Hawley. Aye. Mr. Tillis. Aye. Mr. Kennedy. Aye. Mrs. Blackburn. Aye. Mr. Schmidt. Aye. Mrs. Britt. Aye. Mrs. Moody. Aye. Mr. Durbin.
No.
Mr. Whitehouse.
No.
Ms. Klobuchar. No. Mr. Coons.
He wants to know by proxy.
No by proxy.
Mr. Blumenthal.
No. I guess until we.
Ms. Serrano. No. Mr. Booker.
No.
Mr. Padilla.
No.
Mr. Welch.
No.
Mr. Schiff.
No.
Chairman Grassley.
Aye.
On this vote, the ayes are 12, the nays are 10.
The vote of 12 to 10, the nomination will be favorably reported to the floor. Do you want to speak? Yeah, please do now. And will some, I got to go vote, will some senator on my side stay?
Thank
Okay.
you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that this country, in this Congress, is in the midst of what has been a slow-moving but rapidly accelerating constitutional crisis. It began most visibly on January 6th of 2021, when the two norms of this republic, the peaceful transfer of power and the renunciation of violence, were breached. And where many members of the House and Senate voted against certifying the election of the person chosen by the American people. President Trump then, and President Trump today, continues to assert that the 2020 election was stolen. Stop the steal. He won the 2024 election. His election was certified. He's entitled, as president, to vigorously use the powers of the presidency to implement the policies that he advocates. He's not entitled to violate the Constitution in his effort to do so. Mr. Chairman, in my view, the beginning of the Trump administration is showing a contempt for the Constitution and a lawlessness that is dangerous to the future of our republic. Federal spending, clearly unconstitutional. Shutting down agencies created by Congress with no authority to do so. removing leaders of agencies, including inspector generals, against the clear requirements of law, firing government employees subject who have civil service protections, threatening to deport people based on their political views, revoking by executive authority birthright citizenship. These are just some of the actions that the president has taken where he has no authority to do so. On Monday, a federal judge said that the White House defied his order to release billions of dollars in federal grants, marking the first time a judge has expressly declared that the Trump administration is disobeying a judicial mandate. This country is headed into a situation where, in addition to acting without the authority, the president is indicating he will defy rulings from the branch of our government, the judiciary. Vice President Vance has made very clear his point of view on this. Judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate powers. Of course, under our Constitution, since Marbury versus Madison, the court is the final arbiter of what is constitutional or what is not. My colleagues, my view of this is that the administration is showing maximum contempt for core constitutional values, including, most importantly, the separation of powers. We have a dilemma here. There are many in this committee that are fully in support of the policies that President Trump is pursuing. That's, of course, your right and his right. But the unique responsibility each of us as a United States Senator has is to guarantee that in pursuit of those policies, it is done within the constitutional boundaries. This is not just to talk about civic aspiration. It's a recognition that the separation of powers, that the system of checks and balances, that the concept that ambition in the executive should be matched with the ambition in the legislature has held this country together for 250 years. We have fierce debates about important public policy matters. But what allows us to resolve those, despite disagreements, intense disagreements, is the pushing and the shoving, the engagement, the winning and moving forward, losing a fight and falling back, but all within the norms of the Constitution. That's being threatened, and I don't say that lightly. But what has happened on January 6th is continuing. And where we saw the stop the steal, the renunciation of the decision that the American people made on 2020 in that election, and the candidates, many of them who came before us, including Mr. Patel, unable to simply say who won the 2020 election, continuing to stop the steal narrative. And then with President Trump, in his first weeks in office, acting in ways that challenge the constitutional order. I'm voting against Mr. Patel because he is clearly an instrument in that effort to continue eroding the precepts of the Constitution on the separation of powers. My colleagues, this is a very difficult time, particularly for my colleagues on the Republican side. You support many of the President Trump's policies, and as I say, that's your right. But it is so essential to each of us as a U.S. Senator to make our own judgments about whether the manner in which power is being used on the executive branch is a threat to the power of the legislative branch, the Article I branch. We, each of us, must be custodians of that constitutional order in our role as the legislature in it. Tough judgments that have to be made. My judgment is that the president is showing absolute contempt for the United States Congress. And the next stop is contempt for the United States judiciary.
Senator Schiff will be joining us shortly. To my friend, Senator Welch, I hope we have a great relationship, but some of the things that he was talking about, the tug and pull of the executive and the legislative branch, plays out this way every time you have a transition of power. The best example I can use is a very current example right now between a Democrat governor and a Republican legislature in the state of North Carolina. We have a new governor who in his first 90 days is probably going to do, as he should, push the boundaries of the executive branch. That's their job. The same thing with President Trump. We need to continue to assert that there are very clear differences enshrined in the Constitution between who has authority, but to pretend that that just occurred in this administration is looking past the endless speeches that were made over the last 4 years about President Biden stretching his authority, being challenged in court, et cetera. So I don't think that this is new. And I do believe that getting back to Mr. Patel, that he's been treated unfairly. I had some posters here I'm not going to use, didn't even intend to speak until we determined that we need to allow more time for Mr. Schiff. But I heard a lot of people say in their comments, if the allegations are true. Now, this is coming from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. So they're not 100% they're sure, but it sure certainly fits comfortably into a narrative in opposition to Mr. Patel. We heard a video referenced, I think, by Senator Whitehouse about, I think it was Senator Whitehouse, one of the members here, talking about the chopping of logs of the people on the so-called enemies list, which was an index to a book that Mr. Patel wrote and published. If you kept watching that same video that he didn't produce, and it was many years ago, you'll see that he was also chopping off at the end of the log, MAGA, Truth Social, and a couple of other logos. Yeah, just put that up real quick. So everybody conveniently stops, presses pause at the point to make their argument. But if they've gone a little bit further, they would have seen other things are coming off the log. So guys, let's be fulsome in our research, our response, or our basis for opposing or supporting a nominee. I think Mr. Patel is going to come and fix an agency that I have great admiration for, that I still believe is the gold standard for law enforcement agencies in the world, in the history of the world. But to suggest that others should not be put under a microscope, I think is naive. I supported Chris Wray, and yet he disappointed me in that he is at the top of the agency and there were inappropriate investigations going along. I supported Merrick Garland when he was put forth by Senator Biden, and yet he's disappointed me with some investigations and activities in the DOJ that were absolutely inappropriate under his watch. Did he know about it? I don't know. But what I do know is he was the head of the organization, and at some point you have to hold people in these organizations accountable. I trusted Mr. Comey until he gave me a reason not to. So for people to think that we should keep the FBI as it is and not question some of the politically motivated activities, whether a Democrat or a Republican is in power, are either being naive or just waiting for the opportunity when that slant is in the favor of their own their worldview. I, for one, want the FBI to do the job it does very well and nothing more, never to be motivated by political retribution. I said yesterday to a nominee, this needs to end. The political physics of for every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction is what is tarnishing the reputation of the finest law enforcement agency recognized that way worldwide, and we can do better. There were other people that were saying that Mr. Patel condoned the January 6th attacks. I asked him when he was sitting right there, does he agree with me that people that attack Capitol Police officers are thugs? And he said that if he were asked by the president to have given pardons to those thugs that attack Capitol Police officers, that his recommendation would have been no. And yet people want to pretend that he was okay with that, coming in as the head of the FBI. So folks, let's just be honest here. There was someone else who said, there was a Republican that said this is a shirts and skins exercise. I'm the one that said it. Because when you see Pam Bondi, who has personal relationships with people on the other side of the aisle, not get a single Democrat vote from this committee, then clearly we're in a shirts and skins posture. Not always, probably not even for the remainder of this Congress. But right now, I stand by that characterization, and we saw it play out again here today. So unless Senator Durbin has anything to say, we'll be at ease until Senator Schiff arrives.
Hey Corey, you want to switch over to the RFK while we're waiting on this one?
Yeah. I've just got it going right now so everyone can see right now. What I'm able to tell is that it is 51-47. So they're just counting votes right now.
Lindy McMahon.
If that's the case, then he is confirmed because 51 is tiebreaker.
Yep. Linda McMahon also has her confirmation hearing as well. Let's go to that. I'm going to share this now.
Correct. The education of those states.
Ms. Shaheen, no.
Governors have put in programs, for school choice, et cetera, and looking and what kind of results, are we seeing? I was heartened by the state of Louisiana in the recent NAEP scores that came out that they had brought up their reading and their math scores by a considerable percentage because they went back to basics. They were teaching children to read and write and do arithmetic. And I think I heard
Feel free to jump
Superintendent
in, Corey, get an update on the JFK thing.
of the Louisiana schools say that he used
well
everything from
on my end.
flashcards to AI to make sure that the students were getting the basics in education. And that's what we have to get back to.
Sounds like you're suggesting we need to
Senator-
amend or change ESSA. is
Senator
what I'm
Murkowski,
taking.
I was
Go
asleep
ahead.
at the wheel.
Go
You're
ahead.
like way over. Senator King.
I would never describe you as asleep at the wheel, Mr. Chairman. But thank you, Ms. McMahon. I enjoyed the visit we had in our office, especially our discussion about career and technical education. That's a
yes.
Can I ask you about public service?
Turn love into loot this February. Earn the perfect match payout at 7.
During the Bush administration, bipartisan Congress, it's been part of law since
From 6 to 9 p.m. for hot seat drawings.
What is your position on public service loan forgiveness program?
Well, certainly, and thank you very much. And it was good to visit with you in your office, Senator. Clearly, there are programs that have already been passed by Congress that do, in fact, grant loan forgiveness for public service. With our first responders, military, et cetera. And we certainly should honor those programs. And if we want stronger.
Supposed weaponization of the DOJ over the last 4 years, because to me, it represents the most vigorous reinvention of history. The question is asked by some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, why is it that Donald Trump was the only president to be indicted on?
But I have it paused on right where we left off. So once this is done, we'll go back to Linda McMahon.
Definition, a double standard, a treating of this president differently because no other president in history has been indicted so many times. Well, the one doesn't fall from the other. Yes, this president was indicted more than any other president in history because this president committed more crimes than any other president in history. And let's look at what he was indicted for, because we can't just talk about this in the abstract. He was indicted for inciting a violent attack on the Capitol to stop the peaceful transfer of power. And yes, he's the only president ever to be indicted on those charges because he's the only president to have incited a violent attack on the Capitol. That doesn't mean a double standard was applied to Mr. Trump. It means the rule of law was applied to Mr. Trump. Indeed, the fact he was charged was a vindication of the rule of law, that we are a nation of laws, not a nation of men. It was an affirmation of that principle, not its abrogation. The fact that Donald Trump was indicted for bringing hundreds of classified documents to Mar-a-Lago, for refusing to relinquish them, for participating in an effort to obstruct the investigation into their unlawful retention, doesn't mean some double standard was applied to him. It means the same standard was applied to him as anyone who willfully brought hundreds of classified documents home, refused to turn them over, and then conspired with others to obstruct the investigation. Others who were involved in hiding the documents, others who were involved in trying to delete surveillance tapes. The fact that Donald Trump was indicted for making hush money payments to a porn star to hide this from voters before the election in violation of the campaign laws, the fact that he was the first to be indicted for that, well, probably means he was the first presidential candidate to be making hush money payments to a porn star to hide it from voters. And so let's not suggest, let's not market, let's not propagandize about some weaponization, some double standard when grand juries found probable cause to believe he committed these crimes, and the only case that was actually allowed to go to trial, the jury found him guilty on every single charge. Now, my colleagues on the other side say, we have to restore confidence in the Department of Justice and the FBI because the public has such low confidence in them. Well, yes, of course the public has low confidence in the department. The department has been trashed by the former and now current president for years. Of course, circular logic, there's a low opinion of the department and the Bureau because it's been trashed for years. And why has it been trashed? Because the people of the Department of Justice and the FBI had the audacity to believe what we were saying. That is, there is one standard for the rule of law. It applies to everyone equally. It even applies to the high and mighty. It even applies to the President of the United States. I've worked with the FBI since I was a prosecutor more than 30 years ago. They're the finest law enforcement agency in the country. I don't think they have any near peer. They are the best of the best. And to see what they're going through now with this purge, this witch hunt, is just awful for such dedicated public servants. And it's not just, as many of my colleagues have been emphasizing, it's not just that they were assigned cases they had no discretion about taking. Yes, that's true. But it's not just that. It's the fact that these cases were also deeply legitimate cases involving people who violently attacked this building, including, by the way, a prosecutor named Emil Bove, one of the guys leading this witch hunt. It was just revealed at the Southern District of New York, where he was working at the time, was one of the aggressive prosecutors working with the FBI on these January 6 cases. Now, he's the guy helping to lead the Inquisition in the FBI, the purging, the witch hunt. So this is what we're doing to the FBI right now. Now, Kash Patel was asked in committee, and he was asked after committee. We've already talked about what he's asked in committee. Let me just read the questions I asked him for the record and his answers. And bear in mind, this is just a few days after his testimony, or immediately after his testimony. And I asked, it has been reported that senior career officials across DOJ have been reassigned or fired since President Trump's inauguration. More than a dozen officials who worked on the special counsel team that investigated Donald Trump and 2 separate criminal cases were fired by Acting Attorney General James McHenry. Within the FBI, senior leaders were ordered to retire, resign, or be fired by February 3rd, 2025. Question, were you aware of these personnel moves before they occurred? Answer, not that I recall. Were you consulted by anyone at the White House, DOJ, or FBI about any of these personnel decisions? Answer, not that I recall. Have you had any conversations with the White House, DOJ, or FBI about these or other personnel moves at the FBI? Not that I recall. Okay, it's one thing if we're talking about events that happened 2 years ago or 4 years ago or 10 years ago. It might be appropriate to say, not that I recall. These were things, conversations he was asked about that happened days or hours earlier. He really doesn't recall whether he talked to people at the White House about firing people at the Department of the FBI. Are we really to believe he doesn't recall? And now, of course, we have whistleblowers who say that he was leading these firings, that he suddenly doesn't recall. That's just not the least bit credible that he doesn't remember. Of course he remembers. I don't recall, not that I recall. That's the language an attorney tells you to use when you want to perjure yourself, but you don't want to be caught in a perjury. This is who we're voting to make the director of the FBI, the guy who says, I don't recall whether I participated in ordering the firing of people. I don't recall. This is the guy who testified to this committee.
I have breaking news for us coming in. I'm going to go ahead and switch tabs real quick here. But Donald Trump Jr. just tweeted this. RFK Jr. confirmed. Let's go, Mayha. Promises made, promises kept. Yesterday, Tulsi Gabbard. Today, Robert Kennedy Jr. Next up, Kash. Let's go, Team America. So it looks like RFK has gotten the votes needed to get confirmation. So congratulations to RFK Jr.
I mean, let's just take a moment here real quick, Project, to talk about this, because I thought for sure Tulsi was going to be the toughest vote. And when I saw Tulsi go through, it's given me a feeling that everyone here is going to get voted through party vote. Do you have any concerns left of Kash Patel not getting confirmed, or are we in the clear now?
I did not think that Kash was going to be the hardest one. Honestly, I thought RFK was going to be the hardest one to get through. So the fact that Kash,
Mr. Bennett, Mrs. Blackburn, Mr. Blumenthal, Ms. Blunt, Rochester,
I think he'll get
Mr.
through.
Booker, Mr. Bozeman.
Yeah, I think so too.
Mrs.
But
Britt.
it also shows how corrupt
Mr. Budd.
Congressmen are.
Ms. Cantwell.
The absolute resistance put up against these 3 nominees out of everyone. And 2 of them were from their own party. So
Mr. Cassidy,
that just shows
Ms.
how
Collins,
far the Democrat Party
Mr. Coons,
itself is
Mr.
fallen.
Cornyn,
I mean, listening to
Ms.
that
Cortez
alliance that
Masto,
we're just reading
Mr.
off
Cotton,
the
Mr. Kramer, Mr. Crapo,
disgusting
Mr.
things
Cruz, Mr. Curtis,
today.
Mr. Daines, Ms. Duckworth, Mr. Durbin,
I can't believe
Ms.
that.
Ernst,
I mean, it is all
Mr. Fetterman, Mrs. Fisher, Mr. Gallego,
pinching
Mrs.
myself
Gillibrand,
to realize that Maha is here.
Mr. Graham, Mr.
Tulsi
Grassley,
is in for
Mr. Haggerty, Ms. Hassan,
Now, the last
Mr. Hawley,
big piece of this
Mr.
puzzle
Heinrich,
itself
Mr. Hickenlooper, Mr. Rono, Mr. Hoven.
It's a good day for America, and it's Thursday. It's the win, people.
Mr. Husted, Mrs. Hyde Smith,
I agree, man.
Mr.
I agree.
Johnson,
I got some weird audio. I got
Mr. Justice,
confirmation votes just hearing through my screen. I don't know. I can't
Mr.
find
Kane,
it.
Mr. Kelly, Mr. Kennedy.
It's one of those. Is that better? Was it me? No.
Yeah, it was you on your end. I was freaking out. I'm like, what's going on here?
My apologies. Yeah, no, they're just going through the RFK vote there, talking about it. It looks like it'll be 53-47.
Yep.
Is a final vote. So, all right, man.
You want to go back to Linda McMahon now? Because we're pretty much done the Kash one, I think.
Yep. Yeah, we'll go over to Linda McMahon. I will be hopping off for the day. So just had some issues to take care of here at home, and then some personal stuff. So, but I was glad I was able to catch this with you, Project. So thanks for the invite to come on here and watch Kash Patel finally get pushed through.
Anytime, man. I'm glad you joined me. It's a good thing. And anybody that wants to support Corey, his Cash App is also scrolling down there at the bottom. His Cash App is scrolling down there at the bottom. If you want to support him, you can also check him out at Phantom. I think it's Phantom Society on YouTube, right? Yeah, Phantom Society on YouTube, and X as well. So give this man some love. Go check him out. He does really great work. He does other live streams as well during the week. And then he's my co-host for our weekly live show that we do on Sunday nights at 7, the Talking Heads podcast. So definitely go give him some love. Anything else you want to say there, Corey, before we switch over to good? All right. Okay, well, in that case, see you later, Corey. And the rest of you guys, we're going to go back here to Linda McMahon where we left off with her. I have it paused exactly where we left off. If you give me 1 second here. And we'll finish hers.
Congress should pass those programs and then we would implement it.
So your commitment is, should you be confirmed, you will fully implement existing public service loan forgiveness programs that have been passed by Congress?
Those that have been passed by Congress, yes, that's the law.
That's very important because during the first Trump administration, Secretary DeVos and the Department of Education slow-walked approvals of public service loan forgiveness. 7,000 people over the course of 4 years were granted forgiveness under the programs. It was about a 3% acceptance rate of fully qualified applicants for public service loan forgiveness. During the Biden administration, more than 1 million applicants were approved for forgiveness, as was appropriate given the congressional directive, and more than 33,000 Virginia public servants were given public service loan forgiveness. If the Doge brothers or somebody else tells you we don't like these programs and we don't want you to implement them, I can count on you to stand up and fully implement them to benefit those who are entitled to the benefit by the congressional statute.
Yes, because that's the law.
Thank you for that. If there's no Department of Education, who will enforce the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act?
Well, I think that is something that I would very much like to understand more and look into. I mean, when IDEA was originally set up, it was under HEW, the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare. After the Department of Education was established in 1980, it shifted over there. I'm not sure that it's not better served in HHS, but I don't know. I haven't yet been able to be in, and if I'm confirmed, it is of high priority to make sure that the students who are receiving disability loans, disability funding, that is not impacted. It is incredibly important that
The-
those programs continue to be funded.
My Virginia parents who have children with disabilities are highly, highly worried right now about the elimination of the Department of Education. Because the IDEA is about funding, and I know you've talked about that already, but it's also about enforcement. You would agree with me that there has to be vigorous enforcement of the requirements of IDEA.
Well, I certainly agree that we want to make sure that that funding gets to those students
I'm
and
not
it's not
asking about
defunding.
funding. I'm asking about enforcement
Well,
of the
yes,
provisions.
the programs have to have accountability. All the programs do.
What role do you think the federal government should play in addressing the national teacher shortage?
Well, boy, that is a really critical issue that we're not attracting and keeping our teachers. One thing I think we need to make sure of, and I'm not sure it's a federal government policy, because that really should be at the state level. How are we educating and teaching and training our teachers? How are we making sure that they have the supplies that they need in their classrooms? We need to make sure that the funding is proper in the state so that they can support teachers.
Let me say a word about funding. Just in the first couple of weeks of the Trump administration, here's what they have done with respect to the teacher shortage. They've canceled grants going to jurisdictions, including jurisdictions in Virginia, on teacher training programs that have been designed to reduce teacher shortages. There's also a national priority that I'm sure you're familiar with, national board certification for teachers. It's kind of giving teachers the ability to sort of up their professional credentials, and often local governments and occasionally the federal government will give an incentive, a financial incentive for upping your credentials. The Trump administration canceled the grant that goes to the organization that administers national teacher certification. I get it that the primary responsibility for dealing with teacher shortages is at the state and local level. But the federal government has played an important role in this, and there are important ongoing initiatives to help states deal with it that this administration is canceling, suggesting that they don't really prioritize having highly qualified teachers standing up in front of every classroom. My time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Command, thank you for being here. Nice to see you again. Let me just say this. The last 4 years have been, in many ways, absolutely hellacious for students on our college campuses. You had the last administration which issued federal rules, binding regulations that required our college campuses to put biological men into women's locker rooms. You've had multiple universities claiming the mandate, claiming the cover of the Biden administration, forcing women to accept biological men in women's sports. And so you've seen young woman after young woman denied basic safety in their changing facilities, for heaven's sake, basic safety in their dorm rooms, not able to play college sports. Now, I'm delighted that a federal court finally struck down this Biden administration rule back in January, just over a month ago. And President Trump issued a clear, strong, unequivocal executive order saying that Title IX will be enforced according to its terms, which is Title IX protects women's sports. It protects women on college campuses. No more men in women's locker rooms. This is a huge victory for common sense and the rule of law. My question to you is this. A number of universities, including some very prominent ones that love to call themselves elite, have said they're not going to follow that executive order. They're going to keep having men in women's locker rooms. They're going to try to get men in women's sports. What can be done to ensure that these colleges comply with the law and that women are safe on campus and that women are able to play sports without men interfering?
Well, certainly, I agree with you that I was very happy to see that those restrictions on Title IX vacated, so that we are really back to what Title IX was originally established to do, and that was to protect sexual discrimination. And women should feel safe in their locker rooms. They should feel safe in their spaces. They shouldn't have to be exposed to men undressing in front of them. I think I heard one person the other day say, well, the guys just should hold the shower curtain in front of them so that they aren't exposing themselves. I mean, Really, that's just not what we should be doing. We want to make sure that Title IX, which is the law, is enforced. And we need to uphold that.
Will you investigate those universities that are not complying with Title IX, that are not complying with the president's executive order? These universities are absolutely getting federal funds from this department, the department that you're going to run if and when you are confirmed, and I believe you will be. Will you investigate those universities and give them an ultimatum? Either they need to comply with the law, they need to follow the law of Title IX, they need to follow the rules issued by this administration, your department, or no federal funding. I mean, will you make sure that the law is enforced?
Yes, we will make sure the law is enforced.
Very good. Let me ask you about
The senator will suspend. The committee will come to order. Capitol Police are asked to remove the individual from the hearing room. Members of the audience are reminded that disruptions will not be permitted while the committee conducts its business. The senator will resume.
Don't worry, Ms. McMahon, it's me, it's not you. It's all right. That effect. Let me ask you about something else that's happened on our campuses in the last 4 years, the wave of anti-Semitism that we've seen, particularly after October 7th with the attacks on Israel. Shameful attacks on Jewish students, Jewish American students, Jewish students from overseas. We have seen the most unbelievable pro-terrorist propaganda. And again, these universities taking federal money, getting federal funds, not protecting Jewish students, permitting encampments, permitting violence in some instances, attacks on students on their campuses. The president has issued an executive order on January the 29th on measures to combat anti-Semitism, and he directed the Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights to open Title VI investigations into a number of universities, including Columbia, Berkeley, Northwestern. Will you enforce the law, Title VI to the hilt, and will you make sure that Jewish Americans are safe on our campuses, for heaven's sake, and these crazy students who are committing crimes, breaking windows, smashing into buildings, trapping Jewish students in libraries? Will you make sure that this stops on our college campuses that are getting all of this federal tax money?
Absolutely, or face defunding of their monies.
Very good. And let me ask you about something else. For students who have come to this country on a student visa, and as you know, that's a lot of people on our college campuses. For students who are here on a student visa, who have threatened their fellow students, threatened Jewish students, who have supported terrorist organizations, who have broken our law by trespassing or vandalism or acts of violence against Jewish students, will you see that those students, that their visas are revoked and they are sent home and they're not allowed to stay on our campuses under cover of our laws, committing crimes and threatening our own students? Will you return some common sense to our campuses in this way?
Yes.
Fantastic.
Capitol Police are asked to remove the individual from the hearing room. I'm not sure it's going to matter, but I'm going to remind members of the audience that disruptions are not to be permitted while the committee conducts its business. Please show people the regard you would have them show yourself if you're in this role. It may seem trite, but the rudeness of people who are trying to squelch others as they're trying to communicate in an incredibly public forum is just amazing, amazingly bad. With that editorial comment, I then go to Senator Hassan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome, Ms. McMahon. It was good to meet with you in my office a little bit ago. And I've been starting these hearings with a question I never thought I'd have to ask, and I'll cut to the chase with you because you've said several times that you will uphold the law, so I assume that if the President of the United States gives you a directive that breaks the law, you will instead do what you are legally required to do rather than his instruction.
The president will not ask me to do anything that is against the law.
Well, the last month has told us that it is quite likely he may, but I am going to take you at your word that you will enforce the law because you've said it several times today. 3 weeks ago, the president unilaterally cut all federal grants by issuing an indefinite freeze. That's an unconstitutional and, yes, illegal action that was stopped by federal courts, to my previous point. Subsequent reporting indicates that the president is also planning to eliminate the Department of Education, the department that you're interviewing today to lead. And there's this little bit of, I don't know, the whole hearing right now feels kind of surreal to me. It's almost like we're being subjected to a very elegant gaslighting here, because Senator Hawley just asked you, and you talked about the need to enforce protections for Jewish students on college campuses, but the very department where the enforcement would take place is the Department of Education, and he wants to eliminate it, and you say you will work with him to do that. Similarly, you've talked about the importance of apprenticeships and of career education, really important. There's bipartisan support for that here. The Republicans are in charge. We have bipartisan bill after bipartisan bill. We could go right forward with it, but there's this discussion as if we haven't made any progress on that, and there's somehow a partisan divide about that. So I'd encourage you to look into that. But I want to talk a little bit about why the Department of Education is so important. It plays a critical role in making sure that students, regardless of their zip code, race, gender, disability, or family circumstance, have access to a quality public education. It was established because Congress recognized that the country has a compelling interest in ensuring that all of our kids become self-sufficient members of our workforce and our civil society. New Hampshire schools rely on federal funding of about $2,000 per student to provide that public education. What would you say to parents in my state who are concerned about the president's attempt to cut all federal funding to New Hampshire and to eliminate the Department of Education? Are you telling parents that their children should lose access to special education services, for example, or lose access to trained teachers or school nurses?
Well, thank you, Senator, very much. Let me just object to one point, and that is that the residents in the state of New Hampshire should not be concerned that federal funding is going to be removed from their schools. How they get that federal funding may change.
My time is limited. What department do you suggest would then administer that funding?
Which funding?
The special education funding.
Special education, I think it could very well go back to HHS where it started.
All right, so I just want to be clear, you're going to put special education in the hands of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Now, I want to talk about IDEA a little bit more. I want to turn to a specific issue regarding the president's plan to eliminate the Department of Education. What does the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act promise?
It promises that we're going to take care of these students, that they're going to be provided with assistance that they have in the schoolrooms, the technology that they need, the assistance. And you and I talked a little bit about that with your own child.
IDEA guarantees children with disabilities a free, appropriate education. What is the federal investment promised to states under IDEA? What's it supposed to be?
In terms of dollar amounts?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
The federal government committed back in 1975 when it passed IDEA to pay 40% of the average per pupil expenditure for special education. You know what what the federal government actually does?
I think it's around 14 to 18% at this point.
It's about 15%.
But it's an appropriated amount from Congress, though, and so Congress needs to appropriate those dollars to spend.
That's right, but the President of the United States is proposing, and the Republicans in Congress are proposing massive tax cuts for billionaires, and they're trying to pay for it by massive cuts to education and other services. And just so you know, New Hampshire would lose $60 million in IDEA funding if IDEA were eliminated. My time is almost up. I'm just going to say this. The reason the Department of Education came about in about 1975, IDEA was passed in 1975. 1979 was the department. And Mr. Chair, I'll take just a second here. But people need to understand, people like my son, we talked about him. Before IDEA, before the Department of Education existed, state and local schools did not educate these kids. They barred them from the classrooms. These kids were institutionalized and abused. There is a reason that a Department of Education and IDEA exists, and it is because educating kids with disabilities can be really hard. And it takes the national commitment to get it done. And that's why so many people are so concerned about this proposal to eliminate the department, because they think kids will once again be shoved aside, and especially kids with disabilities. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Senator Scott.
Thanks, sir. One of the things that you and I had an opportunity to talk about a number of months ago, I actually believe that competition does, in fact, increase the production as well as improve the outcome. Typically, whether it's private sector, frankly, public education, I think competition is a key component to making things better and typically cheaper. I think charter schools is a classic example of that. Typically speaking, some of the most successful schools in the country, think about Success Academies in New York City, where you have 83% minorities who are consistently ranked in the top 5 high schools in the state because all kids have high potential of learning. I think that we need to make sure that every parent has choice so that the kids have the best chance at life. By the way, I think that public schools are part of school choice from my perspective. Public schools, private schools, charter schools, virtual schools, homeschool. I want the parents to make that choice because they care the most about their kids. I know some people think it's the teachers' unions. I think it's the parents. Love to hear your thoughts.
I'm sorry.
I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Oh, absolutely. I agree that competition is, I think, very key. When I first started to take a look at education, I was reading the Sunday morning paper in Greenwich, Connecticut, and I saw that public schools in Greenwich, Connecticut were not meeting the levels of No Child Left Behind. And I couldn't understand that. One of the richest communities in the country, how could there be this kind of achievement gap between students, from lower income areas to upper income areas? And so I tried to meet with the superintendent to talk about that article. I couldn't meet with her. I eventually talked to the governor. And the governor said to me, if you're really interested, let me introduce you to some people. And she did. And I started talking to the folks who were developing charter schools in Connecticut, a woman named Daisha Toll. And I visited those schools and I saw how much better those children were performing. They were rapidly coming up to grade level reading and doing math. They were teaching differently. And I thought, this is a real opportunity. This was a charter school, which is a public school.
Yes.
And in the state of Connecticut, it's not fully funded. The facility is not provided. And so it's a public-private partnership to make sure that these schools are offering choice and competitiveness. So we saw it was clear evidence how those schools provided an opportunity for students to succeed.
Awesome. You only have 2 minutes left. That was quick. Maybe I have as much time as I want. I'll be the chair for a few minutes. It's great. Oh my goodness gracious. Never mind. I didn't see that hammer you had there. So back in 2017, I started working on creating a definition in higher education for anti-Semitism. I thought then that we were seeing a little uptick, and having been raised in the Deep South, I'm familiar with discrimination and the challenges that come with, unfortunately, the color of people's skin and or the religious beliefs. And if you look at the level of hate that we've seen recently on college campuses towards our Jewish students, I find it disgusting, frankly. I hope that you will commit to investigating reports of anti-Semitism to the full extent of the law, especially on college campuses around this country.
Yes, absolutely. There should be no discrimination of any form. But, I fully believe that there should be First Amendment protection for discourse and for freedom of speech. But when you become involved in activities that are actually endangering the students that are on campus, then that is not what should happen. And those schools that accept federal funding that allow that to happen should face defunding.
Thank you. And my last question, I know that many of us on my side of the aisle think that DEI is about power more than it is about anything else. I think diversity actually is very healthy for our country. It is the backbone and the strength of our country. I think diversity, equity, and inclusion is a political movement that has very little to do with the advancement of people based on the merit, based on what they have to offer, and more to do with about gaining power and political position. President Trump and I worked a lot on HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities. He was able to take that funding to the highest level in the history of the country. He was the first president and the only president to make that funding permanent. There's no doubt that our country still struggles with the issue of race, but one of the shining examples of a merit-based system that helps those who do not have see the perspective that the American dream is for them. I hope that you will commit to continuing the efforts of President Trump on supporting historically Black colleges and universities.
Yes, as a matter of fact, I met with the president of Howard University a week ago, and we sat and talked through a lot of the different programs that are offered there. And I was very impressed, and I understand that I believe that I'm an honorary Board of Regent member. That may not be the right description by virtue of if I am confirmed as the Secretary of Education, and I look forward to continuing those programs.
And with my last 5 minutes,
Thank
Make it fast.
okay, I'm done.
Thank you, Senator Scott. I see Senator Hickenlooper jumped in front of the freshman. No,
I'll yield to the freshman, just out of deference to her frosh status.
okay. Senator Blunt Rochester, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair and Mr. Hickenlooper, for that sharing of the time. I will first start out by acknowledging that today here with us are representatives from the Delaware State Education Association. And I want to thank them and all of their members for being here in Washington, but more importantly, for what they do for the students and families in the state of Delaware. I also want to thank you, Ms. McMahon, for taking the time to come and meet with me and talk about a myriad of issues. I especially appreciated your candor in our meeting. And, you know, as I'm sitting here watching the passion of the participants, of the members, it is clear that education is so important to this country. And I am clear-eyed about the challenges that we face in accomplishing the goal of ensuring that all students are able to be prioritized. I shared my concerns about the call to abolish the department. I am particularly concerned as a former cabinet secretary myself. Cabinet secretaries do have the influence, the power, the responsibility to share what is good, what is bad, what is wrong. And so I understand waiting until you get into a position to figure some things out, but there are core basic things like, do we have the confusion that people have over this executive order on diversity? They are scared. The fact that school kids are afraid to come to school, maybe because of their status, we're hearing all kinds of stories, and that's why this hearing is so important. That's why this position is so important. And I'm just a little confused because part of the reason why it was created was because in HEW, children were buried into these big departments. Why do you think that a department that is focused and that really is dealing with children, whether it's civil rights, disability, providing the checks and balances, why do you think that it is better to stick the functions of dealing with children with disabilities in a huge department that will not have the same priority?
you very much, Senator, for that question. The bottom line is because it's not working. Department of Education was set up in 1980, and since that time, we have spent almost $1 trillion, and we have watched our performance scores continue to go down. I do believe that it is a responsibility to make sure that our children do have equal access to excellent education. I think that that is best handled at the state level, closest to the states, working with state administrators, teachers, parents, who should have input into their curriculum.
I have only 2 minutes, and I just want to follow up. Do you believe that any school benefiting from taxpayer dollars should be required to follow federal civil rights laws?
Schools should be required to follow the laws.
Anybody getting taxpayer dollars. And so that's good. So private schools should not be able to turn away a student with a disability or a student based on their religion or their ethnicity or race.
Well, private schools aren't taking federal dollars.
But I'm saying,
so they have the ability to say that if they do not believe that they
receive them.
Well, if they believe that they cannot best serve that student and they're not taking federal dollars, then they have the right not to accept that student.
But I'm speaking specifically when we talk about, there's a lot of conversation about vouchers. If private schools take federal dollars, can they turn away a child based on a disability or religion or race?
Well, I think that there are also some public schools who are saying that they don't have the.
Really just a
the-
yes or no?
No, it's not. It really
Well,
isn't.
For me, if you want to
If you-
follow up, because I'm kind of running out of time.
Okay, I'd be happy to follow, and I'd look forward to following up with you to discuss that. Thank you very much.
Okay, because this is one of the big concerns that we hear about. Also, I believe that as a country, as I said, we've benefited from checks and balances. It's a hallmark. If you're concerned, how would you defend the rights of all students if state and local governments are unable or won't address violations of students' civil rights? For example, how will you intervene if a student is being bullied or harassed on the basis of race or disability?
Well, certainly civil rights, are the rights of everyone. And so we'd want to make sure that our schools are enforcing. The bullying shouldn't happen anywhere. No child should be made to feel uncomfortable. So it is, but the Department of Education does not
Or would you
control
put
that from
this in-
Washington.
Would you put this in the when we talked, you mentioned the Department of Justice. Would you move this to the Department of Justice?
Well, one of the things that we talked about, as I said this morning, that I think there may be more appropriate places that maybe the Department, OCR, that is currently in the Department of Education, is better served in the Department of Justice, where they have civil rights attorneys as well. But I don't know those things yet. If I'm confirmed, I look forward to getting in and really digesting and understanding where all of these particular aspects need to fit to best serve our students. That's the goal.
Well, you
It's to
can-
protect our students.
I look forward to following up. You can understand there is a lot of distrust based on people's motivations in just the past few weeks. I think that's why you're seeing all of what you've seen in this audience today in terms of participation of the folks here. This is important. Our students are important, as you know. And so I really hope that this administration and that you will recognize that there are students, there are teachers, there are parents that need the support and the help. And we hope that you will continue as well with your support of HBCUs.
Thank
I
you,
yield
Senator.
back. Thank you so much,
Thank you
Senator
so
Marshall.
much. Good morning, Ms. McMahon. Good to see you.
Thank you. Good to see you too.
You bet. Ms. McMahon, when I speak to youth, I typically talk about the three pillars of my life: faith, family, and education. And thanks to a strong faith, a loving family, and the public educators in my life, I was a first-generation college kid who got to live my American dream and become a physician and practice in rural medicine. So this education thing is so important to all of us on both sides of the dais. I raised 4 kids in public schools. And unfortunately, I've seen the deterioration of the education system. And again, we have the most incredible teachers and coaches back home, and I'm grateful for all of them. But I think we'd all agree we're going the wrong direction. Just really big picture, what would be your top priorities? How do we change the ship's direction?
Well, certainly the president has given a very clear directive that he would like to look in totality at the Department of Education and believes that the bureaucracy of it should be closed, that we should return education to our states, that the best education is that closest to the kids, and that we should work with our local schools, with our superintendents, with our parents to make sure that the education that our students are getting are the ones that is best for them. It's not one size fits all education policy throughout the country. Governors have taken great strides in implementing school choice, making sure that schools have the funding that they need. And we've seen public education in those states actually improve. There have been studies to show that. And so I'm very hopeful that we will get back to the basics of education so that our children can read when they leave 3rd grade, and that 8th grade students can do math and read at proficiency. Today, only 1/3 of high school students graduating can read proficiently. That means 2/3 can't. We are failing our students, our Department of Education, and what we are doing today is not working, and we need to change it.
Thank you. Ms. McMahon, should biological boys, be allowed to compete against girls in sports?
I do not believe that biological boys should be able to compete against girls in sports. And I think now that they certainly not only have the people spoken, because that was something that President Trump ran very hard on, but also the court has spoken.
Ms. McMahon, I feel like there's that anti-Semitism has become endemic in our universities. Would you be open to some type of an anti-Semitism commission to evaluate the progress of the universities on this issue?
Yes, I would, and I'd look forward to perhaps working with you or other members of the committee on such a commission.
Okay. Let's talk about workforce Pell Grants for a second. I mean, we can't keep doing what we're doing. The average starting salary for graduates from our community colleges and technical colleges back home is higher than our four-year universities, and their debt is close to zero, if not zero as well. What would you speak to what do you feel about more flexibility of Pell Grants?
Well, I certainly would like to see workforce Pell Grants, and it goes through various stages of getting passed, but I definitely think that workforce Pell Grants are something that could stimulate our economy, provide opportunity for those who want to participate in skilled-based learning, to have the opportunity if we'd have short-term certificates of Pell Grants that would get those students into the workplace faster if they want to be electricians, HVAC developers.
And apprenticeships as well?
And apprenticeships and internships, all of that. And in fact, in the first Trump administration, I was part of, with SBA and working with the Department of Labor, of making sure that there were more apprenticeship programs across the country, because those are very, very vital to the growth of not only our economy, but our businesses in general.
Thank you, Ms. McMahon. I appreciate your answers and look forward to supporting you. Again, education is so important to all of us. To live that American dream, we need a strong education system. I know you're committed to that as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Senator Hickenlooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Ms. McMahon, for your public service and for coming back and going through all this. Again, I thought when you were talking to Senator Blunt Rochester, your comment that bullying shouldn't happen anywhere is true, is absolutely true. It shouldn't happen in schools, it shouldn't happen in homes, it shouldn't happen in government. And I'm not going to go over, I agree on the things so much you've covered, anti-Semitism and making sure that there's great clarity around that. I want to talk a little bit about history and the teaching of history. I used to talk about topophilia, it means love of place. And I believe it's a basic building block of economic development of people's affection for a place. And that affection comes largely through the teaching of the history of that part of your state or your county, however that gets broken down. But I think teaching every part of our history is important. Colorado, some of the worst parts of our history, Governor Ralph Carr, a Republican governor who's one of the few Western governors who, when we were putting large detention facilities together for Japanese Americans during at the beginning of World War II, he said, not only we're not going to support that, but any Japanese Americans who want to should come to live in Colorado and live freely. We had the Sand Creek Massacre, where Colorado volunteers slaughtered almost 200, mostly women and children. But I think you mentioned in your testimony that the importance of teaching true history. And I understand the emphasis on positive, but I want to make sure that we agree on the teaching of all of it, both positive and negatives, just because as an entrepreneur, you learn more from your mistakes than from what you do right. And I think making sure that we don't gloss over the troubling parts of our history that we're not letting that slip behind us.
Well, clearly, I do agree that we should teach our history, the true history, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because we don't learn unless we recognize our mistakes. I will say that the Department of Education does not establish curriculum, but that is handled at the state level. But clearly, I am in favor of our history being taught exactly as it happened.
Right. Well, I appreciate that. And it's funny that a lot of people don't. So it's good to get that on the record. We talked a little bit about apprenticeships and the importance of apprenticeships. I think the comment you made just that almost 2/3 of our kids when they graduate from high school cannot read proficiently is a disgrace that we should all not accept. And as I think as you recognize, it's not that we don't have good teachers. I think we have great teachers in every state. It's a very powerful statistic that in almost every survey, parents think that the school systems are broken except theirs. They think their school is pretty good. And I think that's a reflection of the quality of teachers we have. But this notion that everybody should go to college, I think is prevalent and persistent. That you've talked about the importance of alternative career pathways. When you were in the office, we discussed this. One of the major issues we hear on trying to push apprenticeships, not just to trades and not adult apprenticeships at 18, but 16, 17, 18-year-olds while they're in high school, going and working a couple days a week at an insurance company, could be a law firm, anywhere, but learning what a job place looks like, coming back to school and learning things that might make them more successful there. One of the problems is that type of an apprenticeship, so many of the academic advisors are just focused on that 4-year college track. And that's what the parents are kind of expecting. They may not even realize what apprenticeships are around there. What can you do as Secretary of Education to share with high schools all across America that these other alternative pathways are available?
Well, certainly I've been on the record even when I ran for the Senate in the state of Connecticut. I ran twice and didn't win, but I always talked about how we needed skills in our country that we did not have the trades that we need to have today. But I also talked about how parents, I think, are encouraging their children only to go to college and not necessarily recognizing that there are other avenues that those children could pursue. I clearly was a parent who were pushing both my children to go to college, but I realized today that there are other opportunities for students to succeed and enter into a pathway that they will be successful in their lives. So I think apprenticeships, internships, working the public-private sector to make sure that we have our curriculum that is designed for the needs of the communities and business. I think that's incredibly important. It's one of the things that we've striven to do at Sacred Heart University that I sit on the board of education. What are the needs of the community and how can that curriculum be structured to satisfy that need? And that's, I think, critically important.
Great. And we're out of time. Of course, I've got millions more questions. Maybe we'll continue that discussion. I appreciate you being open about not wanting to end the Department of Education completely and not your willingness to look at Pell Grants on a larger scale. Thank you.
Senator Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just as a side note, I'm struck by the outburst of some of the protesters in the room, and a number of them have told us that they're teachers. Can you imagine them teaching these people teaching our kids in classrooms across America, and they come here and act like children with outbursts and try to prevent us in an attempt to prevent us from doing our job to move you forward to do the important work that you have to do. For me, that's what this is all about. I have 3 daughters who are in grade school in public schools, and I want to get politics out of the classroom. I want political flags and political statements and ideologies out of the classroom. I want teachers to teach our kids and prepare them for the jobs of the future. And I'm very intrigued with what President Trump is talking about in dismantling the federal Department of Education, because I served in the State House, and the Indiana State Constitution devotes a number of chapters to educating our kids. And the last time I checked, the federal Constitution doesn't say a single thing about education, because our founders in their wisdom recognize that is a role of the state. And Ms. McMahon, I know we've talked about this before, but this is about an attitude of empowering teachers and schools and moms and dads to give our kids the best chance that they can possibly have. And I know that you agree with this, but when I ask anyway, can't the state of Indiana do a whole lot better of a job of spending dollars on education rather than bureaucrats in Washington, D.C.?
I certainly believe that to be true, Senator. Yes, and that is definitely what the president believes as well. That I'll be repetitive, that education is best handled closest to the child to understand what that child needs and what the community needs. And working with parents, parental rights are so important in educating our children. And I definitely believe that should be our return to the states.
Speaking of wasting money, the Biden Department of Education allocated over $1 billion in grants toward diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And that included $4 million toward a, quote, culturally responsive computer science camp for high schoolers, $1 million to train elementary teachers in Iowa on, quote, equity-centered education, $38,000 for a one-day session with a, quote, equity consultant in Michigan, countless dollars toward race-based hiring, which is unconstitutional and unlawful, by the way. Will you commit to ending all racial discrimination in government programming at the Department of Education?
That will be my goal, absolutely, to work, and I'd look forward to working with you and other members of the committee as well, and with Congress to make sure that we can take the ideology, if you will, out of education and focus on actually teaching our students to read and to write and to do arithmetic, because they cannot be successful if they cannot do the basics.
Some of my colleagues today have talked about the rise of anti-Semitism on college campuses, and I think one of the motivators of that is money that flows from adversarial foreign countries like China and other countries with an anti-American agenda that are donated to many of our colleges and universities in the United States of America. And it turns out that the Department of Education plays a key role in reporting and making those foreign donations transparent. While I want to ban them altogether, China should never be donating money to colleges and universities in Indiana or anywhere else in the country. Have you thought about what other steps that we can take to eliminate foreign influences, especially anti-American influences on our college campuses?
Well, I think what we've seen is the lack of transparency of where the money comes from, how much, and what it's used for when it gets to colleges. And I think there absolutely has to be more transparency in tracking that money.
And I hope that I saw what President Trump did in his first term and the 4 years of tightening many of these donations and blocking them, making them transparent. And then I served on the Education Committee in the House for 8 years. So 4 years of President Trump, 4 years of President Biden. There was no attention paid to this under President Biden. Chinese Communist Party dollars flowing to colleges and universities that are no longer reported, made transparent. I know that will be a big priority of yours because we talked about it, and I want to do everything I can to help you block it, make it the public should know that adversaries of the United States of America are giving money to the universities that they're sending their kids to. So thank you very much for your leadership. You have my full support. I look forward to working with you. I yield back.
Thank you.
Senator Markey.
Thank you. Yesterday, President Trump said he'd like the Department of Education to be closed immediately. He called the department a big con job. Education funding helps us work towards a country where every student can go to their school knowing that they will get the same education as the family that can afford private school. Public school is not a con job. It's equality for every student, regardless of income. It helps guarantee that every student, including the 26 million low-income students, the 10 million rural, 5 million English language learners, 7 million disabled students, and 1 million homeless can go to public school knowing they have the same opportunity as every other student. Trump's crusade to abolish the Department of Education and, quote, root out waste and fraud and corruption for cuts to public schools is an attack on every public school student, parent, teacher, paraprofessional, administrator, and school worker in this country. Waste, fraud, and corruption is code for cuts to public education for all of those students. So I have here the text of a bill I've been working on, the No Cuts to Public Schools Act. This bill would guarantee that federal funding to public schools could not be cut during the length of President Trump's administration. Mr. McMahon, can you commit today to not cutting funding for public schools in this country.
Well, certainly what I'll commit to, sir, is that funding for schools is appropriated by Congress. And that funding should continue. Congress will continue to pass those laws. The Department of Education is not doing that.
So will you
So-
support, will you oppose any cuts to public education? Yes or no?
Well, the president is not saying that we should cut funding to public education.
Yes, he is.
He is
Yes,
simply
is.
saying, well, I would disagree with you there. We-
Elon Musk yesterday announced he would immediately cut $900 million from the Department of Education. And he stood right next to Trump and made that very clear. So the answer I'm looking for, by the way, is a yes. I will fight to make sure that public funding is not cut, because that announcement was just made, the $900 million cut. And we know that's just a down payment to gut the education of every public school student in America. And by the way, to find the billions of dollars that are going to be needed for the tax cuts for billionaires and millionaires in our country, they have to go to the Department of Education, they have to go to Clean Air and Clean Water, they have to go to Medicaid, they have to go to the Affordable Care Act, they have to go to all of the programs that they are calling waste, fraud, and corruption. But that's just another way of saying the programs that help the poor and the sick and the elderly, the disabled in our society. That's what we are talking about, because they want all of these programs gutted to find the funding for the tax breaks. So DOGE, as it's rumbling through the Department of Education right now, just stands for Department of Gutting Education. That's what they're doing. They're inside looking at it. $900 billion is the down payment. So, Ms. McMahon, can you commit today to fight so that not $1 from public schools goes towards paying for tax breaks for millionaires and billionaires?
Well, that was certainly a broad view of what is going on right now today with trying to find waste, fraud, and abuse. Those groups that are in the Department of Education, from my understanding, have looked at competitive contracts that are bidding. And let's see where that money's going. How's it being spent? I'm not there. If I may, Senator,
what they're doing,
you've asked me a question. I would really like the opportunity to answer.
What they're doing is, first, they announce the cuts. Then they go to find where it is. So it's all backwards. And again, we know what the plot is. And ultimately, the answer I'm looking for is a yes, because if even $1 flows away from an educator or a student towards a billionaire tax break, that will be immoral in our country. Immoral. These kids deserve the funding which they are receiving. And Donald Trump and Elon Musk should be ashamed that they are working harder for billionaires than they are for working families, for these kids who need help. 90% of disabled of students go to public schools. 95% of students with disability go to public schools. And Trump and Musk want to take from those students to give to billionaires. That is immoral. It's wrong. It's unjust. And we're going to fight it every single step of the way. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Markey. Senator Moody.
Hello, it's so great to be with you. Thank you for joining us today. I'd like for you to have some time to answer some questions. Wouldn't that be unique? I'm wondering, one of my very first important questions is it harder to sit composed and calm and focused among a bunch of WWE wrestlers, or is it harder to sit in this hearing with people popping up and yelling at you all day?
I can stay pretty composed and focused in either environment.
As you know, the United States Department of Education provides more than $120 billion in grants, and much of that flows through to our public university systems. And the Higher Education Act makes a condition for higher education to receive a single dollar of that money, that higher education institution has to be accredited. Now, that's not by the Department of Education. That they have delegated that to a private entities of persons that aren't accountable to voters, aren't accountable to the president, and they decide who's accredited, which institution actually is eligible to get all that money. In Florida, We have had the experience that our post-secondary institutional accreditor, the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools Commission on Colleges, also known as SACS, has decided that it will threaten that accreditation, meaning threaten our federal funding, if we even suggest that maybe a former policy leader, lawmaker, conservative might go into leadership in a university. Or one of my dear friends, Senator Scott, former Governor Scott, had suggested that he was going to go on campus and speak about hazing. Seems pretty expected. As a parent, I would want that. And our accreditation was threatened. Even in North Carolina, when they wanted to institute a policy focused on, or excuse me, a program focused on ideological diversity, their accreditation was threatened. As Attorney General of Florida, I sued. I think there's a constitutional problem with the Department of Education delegating that authority to a private organization who dictates whether someone can get federal funding and tries to insert their own preferences and policies down into the education policies of a state and force it on our educational institutions. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that today. I don't think it's just frustrated Florida. I think, yes, we were one of the first states to stand up and fight and go to court and try and stop that. But a lot of the themes that you're hearing, especially with some of the nominees, are we're trying to stop unelected bureaucrats or unelected people in these private organizations that have been either getting a lot of authority or a lot of federal money pushing policies into the states. And we don't think that's right. So I wanted to talk to you. Do you think that's right?
No, I don't think that's right.
And if you're confirmed, which I expect that you will be, and I hope that you are, I'm very
Thank you.
impressed not only with your some of your educational participation in your own state, but your managerial experience. I think we need that right now. But will you commit to me that you will look into some of the regulations and guidance documents that relate to higher education institutions being able to change their accreditors?
Yes, definitely. And I'd look forward to working with you on that. And there's been a lot of issues raised about these 5 to 7 accreditors that are the ones that are deciding these fates today. And I think that needs to have a broad overview and review.
It may be that we have to look at the accreditation process, and as Congress, we might need to amend the Higher Education Act to make them more accountable. But I do believe, and we're still in litigation, I say we, I'm trying to change hats now as Senator Moody, but Florida is still in litigation about this issue because I do think it's a constitutional problem for an agency to delegate that kind of authority over to a private organization. And I think a lot of that delegation is really where you're seeing states getting frustrated, people getting frustrated, because in these agencies and in these private organizations, you're seeing an ideological agenda, a policy-driven agenda, and people that are willing to implement it, whether they have the authority or not. And I believe that is where you're seeing so much frustration and why you saw such an overwhelming expectation that this president change things. And I think you're going to help him do that. And I, for one, am looking forward to that. Thank you. Chairman.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Moody. Now it is Senator Kim's turn.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Thank you for coming before us. I guess I just wanted to jump in. I've heard a couple times you mentioned that you believe that Congress would need to be involved if there is an effort to abolish the Department of Education. That's right?
Correct.
Do you know if President Trump shares that sentiment?
I've heard President Trump recently, over the last couple of weeks, in conjunction with his fervor to shut down the bureaucracy of the Department of Education, he has also stated that he will work with Congress to make that happen.
Do you know if Elon Musk, have you had any conversations with him about the Department of Education? Him
I have
or
not.
his team? Why I raise this is that, I just came from another hearing that was talking about foreign assistance, talking about USAID. USAID is another element of our federal government that was codified by Congress, and we see an effort there to dismantle it. Not fully abolish it, but dismantle it basically down to about 600 people. Gut everything, put it under the State Department. So I guess I wanted to just ask you, if something like that was proposed by the Trump administration for the Department of Education, does that have to come to Congress?
Certainly, there are departments that I believe that are in the Department of Education by statute, and those have to be looked at
And what,
Could they-
what,
could
and
they
what,
be
de-
moved?
what elements of the Department of Education are those that are protected by statute?
I believe IDEA is, I think Title I is. And I'd like to discuss that, look into it and discuss it more fully with you.
But for those that are not codified by statute, you're saying those are ones that the executive branch can do as they please.
Well, I think that I would like to look into that more.
Why I kind of mentioned this as well is that, just in the first couple of weeks here, we had a lot of conversation about the surge of anti-Semitism, our strong support and making sure we're protecting students from that type of harassment, from that type of intimidation. Absolutely something we need to stand against in terms of anti-Semitism. But I guess I was alarmed because what we ended up seeing is that multiple attorneys and other staff members of the department's Office of Civil Rights have been placed on administrative leave with no notice, no explanation. And some of them were in the process of investigating cases directly related to anti-Semitic harassment. So I guess I wanted to just ask you, is that something you would support? Do you think that that's the right actions that we should be taking at this time that we see such a surge in anti-Semitism?
Well, Senator Kim, I know it's not a great comfort for me to say this morning that I am not yet confirmed and have not yet been in the department. I don't know about all the administrative people that have been put on leave. I want to look into that. I want to understand it. I want to assess the department. I can't do that unless I'm confirmed and I get there, but I would certainly be willing to come back to you with a more specific answer.
But does that concern you at all if you were confirmed, would you make that a priority to go and see whether or not this is going to impact our ability to respond to anti-Semitism?
No, I would want to make sure that we have everything that we need to have in place to protect our students on campuses.
One thing that we have been having this debate on here in Congress is about this, and what we've seen is that Republicans have called for a 25% cut in the budget of the Office of Civil Rights. Is that something you would support?
I would want to see exactly what that impact is going to be and understand it.
Look, I guess I'm frustrated because I feel like this is such a clear place where we can just say, yes, we want to make sure we have as much resources as possible to be able to fight anti-Semitism, to make sure that we're addressing these needs of such a surge. When we see a surge in anti-Semitism, of course we would want a surge in resources to focus on that. So I just wanted to raise that because this whole debate that we're having right now, it feels like it's untethered from just the reality on the ground. And I just urge you, if you are confirmed, that we are understanding the human impact of the problems that are here. I have a second grader and a fourth grader. I got two little boys. And I just had their parent-teacher conference. And yes, we talked through the performance of my kids, the data that NAEP and others are used, the Institute for Education Sciences. Now we're seeing $900 million cuts to that coming out from Elon Musk and his team. But I just raised this is the reason why teachers are concerned right now is not about their own salaries and their own careers. When they talk to me, they talk about the kids. They talk about the kids. That's I find that to be so powerful when these teachers, they're saying, look, I'm not asking about my own career. I'm asking about the kids. So just as you proceed, just remember that. Parents are very scared right now. Now you'll bet.
Thank you, Senator Kim. Senator also Brooks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to just begin my remarks. Hello, thank you so much, Ms. McMahon, for being here today. And I'd like to just begin, follow up with what my colleague said and address what I regard as very disparaging comments. I'd just like to say first by one of my colleagues regarding the educators who have come here today. And in the same vein as Senator Kim, the educators who are here, my colleague referred to them as these people, and said, who would want to be taught by these people, the passionate educators who have come here today, not on behalf of themselves, they're here on behalf of our children. And I want to address how shameful it was to say who would want to be taught by them. They are exactly the kind of people who we want teaching our children. The question I have for you today, I know your parents were civil servants, and so you recognize the importance that they bring to their work, the care and concern that they bring to their work. And I have been very concerned regarding the treatment of many of our civil servants, those especially in the Department of Education. You may know that last night, a number of them were laid off with 15 minutes to have their computers turned off, access to it, just treated really horribly. So the question I have for you, because one of my constituents on a town hall I hosted last night with 17,000 Marylanders said that they are working in a culture of fear at the department, and that civil servants at the department don't know who will be fired next, have little guidance, and feel like they can't do their jobs, and they care very much about the work they're doing. So how will you address the culture of fear in an environment where civil servants, both Democrats and Republicans, who are working there, are feeling undervalued and attacked by this administration?
Well, thank you very much for that question, Senator. And it's always difficult to downsize. It's always difficult to restructure and reorganize in any department. I have faced that, in the business world, because you know that you do impact people's lives. But at this particular point, I know that there are people that are being placed on administrative leave, which means they are still receiving full benefits and salary while their jobs are being looked at and how the department is being evaluated overall. I think people should always be treated with respect and with humility. And I would hope that that is what is going on within the Department of Education. I'm not there in person to see that yet, but it was certainly something that I would strive to do in any reorganization that we would take.
Okay, and I'd also like to ask you regarding the president's targeting of legally binding collective bargaining agreements. He has really targeted those, to ask you whether you will commit to abiding by the agreement and upholding civil service employment protections.
I will certainly commit to working with you and to looking into those issues if I am confirmed to be the Secretary of Education.
And also to ask you whether you will commit to ensuring that federal workers with disabilities, many of them are very concerned about whether they will continue to have reasonable accommodations as required by law.
Well, as required by law is the key phrase there. Yes.
Okay, well, in the same vein, there are some who are concerned about being forced now to reapply for accommodations. These are people who have had those accommodations given to them, and they're being told now that they must reapply for those accommodations with their supervisors. And so will you commit that the department civil servants with disabilities will have their reasonable accommodations honored without interference or delay?
I'll certainly commit, if I'm there and confirmed, to look into all of those and to get back to you.
Okay. And finally, I'd like to ask you regarding the freezing of funds. If you are confirmed, would you support any directive from the president to freeze funds that have been appropriated by Congress, including funds that students and families rely on to pay for college?
If they've been appropriated by Congress, those funds should be disseminated.
Okay, and so you would block any directive. You would not adhere to any directive, including some of our HBCUs in my state, Bowie, Coppin State, Morgan State. You would not interfere with the freezing of those funds.
I commit to you that I will look into every single one of those programs so that I can get back to you and say, this is what I've found, this is what I've discovered, this is what the action is being taken against it or in for of it, because I'd want to be very inclusive with you on that regard.
Okay, the final question, I just have 9 seconds here. Title I, I know that you said you support it. If the Department of Education is dismantled, what will you do to protect the students who are disadvantaged and impoverished on Title I funds?
Well, Title I funds are appropriated by Congress. They flow directly to the states today. They go to the State Department of Education, then they're deployed to the districts. So the Department of Education is not really involved in that distribution.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Brooks. Senator Sanders.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record 18 letters opposing Ms. McCann as Secretary of Education.
So ordered. I will now conclude, but let me first say that the Capitol Police are requesting that the audience remain seated until Ms. McMahon leaves. So just to first say that. Ms. McMahon, thank you very much for being here. You've handled yourself extremely well. I now ask for unanimous consent to enter into the record 55 letters of support for Ms. McMahon's nomination. And this concludes our hearing. For any senators who wish to ask additional questions, questions for the record will be due tomorrow at 5 p.m. Once more, audience, please stay seated till Ms. McMahon leaves. Thank you.
All right, guys. So there you have it. That was all three hearings today. First, we watched Kash Patel's Senate committee hearing, not the full hearing, but the committee hearing. That was pretty much just a bunch of Democrats, grandstanding. But we watched that regardless. He was confirmed in the subcommittee, so now he goes to a full vote. The good news for today is RFK Jr. was confirmed. He, was 100% confirmed. He is the new HHS secretary. So that's great. We're making MAGA or MAHA, make America healthy again. So that's what he is going to do for us, along with Trump. So that's a good thing. And then Linda McMahon, we watched her confirmation hearing today, which was just them asking questions. And then the vote will be on another day. And if I'm available, I will try to cover that for you as well. As well as the final vote for Kash Patel. I'll try to cover that for you when that comes up as well. So thank you guys all for joining me today. I appreciate it. And this channel is fan funded, by the way. So if you appreciate what we do, if you like the channel, you like the articles I write, if you like the live coverage that we give you, then please consider donating. Scrolling down the bottom there are the links to the Cash App and the PayPal and stuff. Or you can buy my products from my website. I sell constitutional products, which help teach people their rights when dealing with police. We sell a 5A cop card and trifold, which specifically tells you exactly what to say, how to say it, and what your rights are when you're interacting with a police officer. So like I said, if you can support us, appreciate it. If not, please support us by liking and sharing. 1 second. So if you can't support financially, then you can support us by liking and sharing the videos. That helps us a lot. And make sure to leave comments as well. And again, thank you all very much, and have a great rest of your day. Peace.